instructed by Webo Wenzel for SAICA, and I'm appearing together with Ms. Nakomba.
Thank you, Mr. Manager.
There is no appearance for Mr. Singh.
Singh is aware of these proceedings.
Yes, when I give you a brief summation of the charges, I will take you through the procedural steps in relation to his notification for the hearing today, and confirm that he was notified and chose not to participate.
Very well. Yes, Mr. Manager.
Thank you, Chair. I have been informed that the committee would have part of the bundles before them, which is numbered A1 to A60, which contains the charge sheet and some correspondence that we exchanged between the parties.
Yes, we do have that.
Yes. I'm not sure whether the committee would prefer me to read the charges into the record or simply treat them as read and just give you an outline of what is in the charges.
We treat them as read.
As a chair, as it pleases. Chair, as the committee is aware, this is a hearing into the conduct of Mr. Anoj Singh. He is a member of SAICA, and we have his SAICA ID number 0324993, just for the record. And he was also a member of SAICA at the times relevant to the charges against him. And the charges against him relate to the time when he was employed as the Group Chief Financial Officer of Transnet, and that covers the period 2012 to 2015. He had been, prior to 2012, an acting CFO at Transnet. And then he joined Eskom in about August 2015 or about, and resigned from Eskom in 2015. And he occupied a similar position at Eskom as Group Chief Financial Officer. And as I will outline later, the charges relate to conduct against him during those periods, both at Transnet and Eskom. And just to deal with procedural matters, which are indicated earlier. You'll recall that the hearing was initially set down for the dates 15 to 19 July, and that those proceedings were postponed at the request of SAICA. And in that bundle that you have, you will find at A35 a letter which records the postponement and the reasons that were given at the time for the postponement. The letter is dated 1 July 2019 and is addressed to Mr. Singh. And in paragraph 1, he's referred to the dates that were initially set down for the hearing. And in paragraph 2, he's told that in the course of preparing for that hearing, SAICA came upon further information that has recently come into the public domain and that implicates your client. In the light of this, SAICA is considering amending the charges against your client. That necessitates a postponement of the DC hearing, and that you be notified of any further steps. And those, the further information that had come to light then and which is now contained in the charges that you're going to hear about relate to his conduct at Transnet. At the time, the charges were related to his conduct at Eskom. And he was then afforded an opportunity to respond to the new complaints, incorporating the complaint about his conduct at Transnet, and you will find that at A39, the notification to him and giving him an opportunity there he's invited to attend a meeting of the PCC, and it will be clear from that, the following page, that he's told where the meeting will take place, and that he's entitled to attend, and over the page he's told what would happen if he did not attend the meeting. And at this point he had not provided a written explanation.
I understood that there is no written explanation at all from Mr. Singh.
Yes, in relation only to the Transnet charges.
Yes.
There is a written explanation in relation to the Eskom charges.
Right.
Which we will refer to when we deal with the Eskom charges. But at the point when he was invited for the meeting of the PCC, he was reminded that he hadn't provided a written explanation at that point, but that he was entitled to attend the meeting and to make representations if he wished to. And I've already referred to 840 to 841. That is the notification for that meeting, ending at 8:42. And he didn't attend the meeting, and nor sent any representation, any representative to the meeting. And the committee resolved at that meeting on the 22nd of October 2019, based on information that was available to it, which he had been warned about, that if he doesn't attend, the committee would decide based on information before it what step to take. And so on the 22nd of October 2019, the committee considered the complaints by SAICA in relation to Transnet, his conduct at Transnet and Eskom, and resolved that the matter should be referred to a disciplinary committee hearing, and as per the charges which currently sit before this committee. And you will find confirmation of that at page 844. And you will see the letter dated 23 October 2019 sent to Mr. Singh and informing him about the outcome of the PCC meeting, and says in paragraph 2, the Professional Conduct Committee convened on 22nd October 2019 to consider the allegations of improper conduct in respect of yourself. The allegations were contained in the charge sheet provided to you in September 2019, and you were invited to provide a written explanation to charges 1 to 11, those are the Transnet charges, by no later than 18 October 2019. We confirm that you did not provide a written response to charges 1 to 11 of the charge sheet. We are instructed by the committee to inform you of its decision in the matter, and the decision is the committee considered the complaint and all supporting documentation, and held that in terms of SAICA bylaw 19.3.9.3, this matter will be referred to the disciplinary committee of SAICA, and SAICA will revert to you in due course relating to the date of the hearing. And then on 30 October at page 846, Mr. Singh was notified of the date of the hearing by a letter dated 30 October 2019, and the first paragraph simply refers him to the previous correspondence, the previous notice, and then it says that 2, you are hereby given notice that the disciplinary committee meeting for your matter is set down from 9 o'clock to 19:30 from 13th November 2019 to 15th November 2019 at the offices of Welser, conference rooms 1 and 2, located in 90 Livonia Road, Center, Johannesburg. Then he's told of his rights. He will be afforded the opportunity to be heard by the disciplinary committee at the place and time, and on the date referred to above, he will be entitled to be represented, and so it goes. Then on the 31st of October, at page 848, the attorneys acting for SAICA, sent a letter to the attorneys which had been acting for Mr. Singh all along, to suggest that the parties hold a pre-hearing meeting. You see at paragraph 3, please advise as to availability for a pre-hearing meeting on Monday, 4th November 2019 at 15:30 to 16:30. We propose that the meeting take place at our council's chambers, and the address is given. And then over the page at 850, there was a proposed agenda enclosed for that meeting. And there were various follow-ups to Mr. Singh's attorneys. You will see at page 853 one of those. Here, after the follow-ups, which start from A55, is a chain of emails starting from A55 going back to A53 for a response from Mr. Singh's attorneys. Ultimately, he said that Mr. Singh was abroad and not being able to attend the pre-hearing. And then there was a telephone call put by Mr. Dario Milo of Magoensa, who represents the SAICA, to find out whether Mr. Singh would attend or his attendees attend the pre-hearing meeting, and also to remind him of the date of the hearing. You see at A58 at the top of that page, following on the letter that I've already referred the committee to in the middle of the page, at the top of the page, a response, a letter from, an email from Mr. Milo to the attorneys for Mr. Singh confirming a telephone conversation that had taken place that afternoon on the 6th of November 2019. To this effect, Dear Simon, I refer to a telephone discussion this afternoon. I record that you informed me that Mr. Singh has elected not to attend and participate in a SAICA hearing scheduled to begin next week, Wednesday, 13 November 2019, not to be legally represented at the hearing. And that is the position that we're in at present, that he will not be taking part, either personally or through a legal representative. And so the committee, we asked the committee to proceed with the hearing in terms of bylaw 20.3, which entitles the committee to proceed should the accused agree to any complaints prepared with the act or fail to attend before the disciplinary hearing at the time and place indicated in the notice issued in terms of bylaw 20.1. So those are the procedural matters, and that's where we stand.
Yes.
In relation to the charges, if I may take the committee back to A1, which is the notice, the amended charges against Mr. Singh. You will have seen when you consider the charges that they are divided into two parts. One part is charges against him in respect of his conduct at Transnet, and then the second part at Eskom.
Mr. Manai, may I just inquire from you? Bylaw 20.3 contemplates that the committee may proceed in Mr. Singh's absence. There's no provision made for how one treats the charges. My preference would be, subject to what you may say, is to then enter a plea of not guilty for Mr. Singh in his absence, and then for the Institute to establish its case.
Yes, we accept that. I was going to say that at the conclusion of the discussion, but it's good Chair raised it up front.
Yes.
You will recall that in relation to Eskom, he has pleaded not guilty and given an explanation, and we agree that in respect of Transnet, we would have to prove the charges on the basis that he's pleaded not guilty.
Yeah, and then just for the record, before you proceed with the charges, then state that the committee, in the absence of Mr. Singh, will proceed with the disciplinary proceedings, and that for that purposes a plea of not guilty is entered on his behalf.
Indeed.
In relation to all charges 1 to 18, I think.
Yeah, that's correct. Thank you, Chair. And just on that, so charges 1 to 11 relate to Transnet, and those are at page A3 to A22, and charges 12 to 18 relate to his conduct when he was at Eskom, and those would be at A23 to A24. And what we propose to do, subject to the leave of the committee, of course, is that in the 3 days that we've set down in this period in November, we will deal with the Transnet charges as in the sequence that they come in the charge sheet, and then if we don't complete the hearing and there's need for additional dates, we will deal with the second part of the charge sheet at a later point.
Very well.
Then all of the Transnet charges, just by way of introduction, relate to Mr. Singh's role in a transaction which has come generally to be known as the 1064 locomotive procurement. And the evidence will show that he played a number of roles in that procurement, over and above just being CFO and member of the Group Exco and ex-official member of the board. He chaired a locomotive steering committee. I think he started off as an acting chairperson and ultimately chaired that committee. And that committee was specifically set up to deal with that 1064 procurement process. And he also prepared memoranda together with other members of Exco for purposes of that procurement process, and which were prepared for the standing committee of the board, which is called the Board Acquisition and Disposal Committee, as well as the Board of Directors for approval, and chaired the negotiating team which led to the conclusion of the contracts. And we will be submitting to the committee ultimately that the allegations which we hope to demonstrate by way of evidence that we will demonstrate is that in those various capacities he effectively abused his position or simply failed to look after the interests of Transnet as he was required to do in his position as CEO, professional position as chartered accountant, and in the leadership role in which he was cast given the positions he held in relation to the procurement process. Now, in broad outline, the charges relate to Mr. Singh's conduct and in respect of the formulation of a business case for the procurement process, which was accompanied or supported by a financial model, which ultimately was approved by the board, allowing for an evaluation process, an RFP to be issued, an evaluation process to be conducted, negotiations to be conducted, the award of contract and the conclusion of contracts, and the implementation of that contract. And the complaints related to information that was provided to the board in the business case itself, certain misrepresentations that we complain about, or failure to disclose full information to the board, leading to approvals in circumstances where information wasn't fully disclosed to the board or misrepresented to the board. And in the business case getting approved and subsequently the estimated transaction costs at the time of the approval in 2013 increasing by an order of about 15.9 billion rand. Contracts getting signed prior to going back to the board for approval, and then the negotiating team together with Exco going back to the board to approve the increased cost of the acquisition of the locomotives in circumstances where the allegation is that the reasons for the increase were either contained misrepresentations or failure to fully disclose the true reasons that led to the increase. And further complaint in the charges is that when the board approved the increase, it was also told that there were certain savings made, and the evidence we're going to present is that there were no real savings. The savings claims are also a function of the misrepresentations that took place in respect of the approvals that the board gave, and certain conduct which was not authorized by the RFP and authorized by the board, such as the splitting of the batches which were ultimately awarded to the four contractors, when initially the intention was to award the contract to two of them, one for locomotives and the other for diesel. As you recall, it was the 1064 comprised procurement for diesel locomotives and electric locomotives. I have previously called it petrol because in the usual way you think the opposite of diesel is petrol, but it's very electric. And so we will try to demonstrate through the evidence that all of those complaints are made out, and that Mr. Singh played a critical role, a leading role in the procurement process, and that we are right to complain against him as a member of SAICA. in holding the position that he held. If I can just briefly just show you that charges 1 to 7, those are charges which relate to the business case directly. And those are pages A8 to A13.
A4.
Page A8 to A14. And the committee will see that
Yes.
before we formulate the charges, we set up a factual background just to give context to the charges. That factual background was also placed before Mr. Singh for his response together with the charges and didn't. So what charges 1 to charges 7 relate to the business case, and if I can just, so the first charge relates to the complaint that when the business case was presented to the board for approval in 2013, a misrepresentation was made that the estimated cost of 38.6 billion excluded any allowance for potential effects from forex hedging and other price escalations. That was important because in terms of Transnet policy, and we hear from the evidence, if you're going to procure products, locomotives, Transnet prefers that the procurement be rand-based. But if it's not rand-based, it's dollar-based or based on some other foreign currency, then you must hedge for future escalations which may have an impact on the price, ultimate price to be paid. And so the initial business case that was presented to the board, the evidence we present will be that allowed for potential foreign currency escalations, so that the impact of the hedging costs to protect Transnet against price escalation was built into that price. But when the business case was presented to the board and approval was granted, it was represented on the basis that that allowance wasn't included in the initial business case. And that included both the forest costs related to forest escalations and price escalations. And then the second charge is an alternative to the first charge, and that is that if it were correct that there was no allowance for foreign escalations and price escalations, then that would have been negligent on the part of Mr. Singh, the CFO and the chartered accountant. First, because he knows that would have a financial impact, given that the business case shows the projection that the rand might continue to fall against the dollar and the euro, from which was the currency of some of the parties from whom they procured the locomotives. And secondly, because the policy that bound him required that there should be a provision for hedging. So then in charge 3, it is very similar to 2, but it's just cast in the alternative that charge 3 rather relates to the increase, reasons for the increase. So 1, we say that the 38.86 billion included allowance for forest escalations and escalations in price. But when the price increased by about 15.6 billion rand, resulting in a total cost of about 54.5 billion rand, the estimated cost of about 54.5 billion rand, the reasons that were given for why there was an escalation included that they now had to make allowance for the cost of forex escalations and price escalations, as if that was never provided for. And the evidence will be that was an misrepresentation. There were other reasons given, which the witnesses will agree with in the evidence. And then charge 4 is again relates to the reasons given to the board for the increase, that the reasons were false or didn't fully account for the full increase of the price.
I'm interested in the formulation of charge 4, which commences with, in paragraph 24.1, the reference to Mr. Singh conducting himself grossly negligent, but thereafter going on to contend that he presented false reasons to the board. I'm not entirely sure whether one can equate the making of false reasons as grossly negligent. It seems to me if that is the case, and that would constitute a false or dishonest conduct.
This might be more serious than gross negligence.
Yes.
So that might, if we make out the case, we would consider our position on what we submit to the committee or what we do with the formulation of the charge. But I think what is important is that the content, the nub of the complaint, as Chair points out, refers to presenting false reasons, and if that is made out, then the committee is free to conclude on how to characterize the conduct once it's proved. But we will come to that in the course of the hearing. And Judge 5, it's in a sense it may be considered by the board by the committee to be a duplication of 4, but we will deal with it in due course, and that is to failure to properly account. There may be a distinction in that even if the reasons in 4 are not false, they don't constitute a full account of what caused the increase of the 15.9 billion rate. So 4 might not be strictly a duplication.
Well, it's in the alternative.
But it's in the alternative.
So,
oh yes, that's right.
Yes.
I overlooked that. Thank you. My junior smiles because she probably made sure that there is the word alternative in there. And Judge 6, Judge 6 relates to whether the business case was still profitable once the estimated cost increased from 38.6 billion to 54.5 billion. You will hear that Transnet, as a matter of policy, adopts what they call a hurdle rate, and the witness will explain what that is by contrast to other forms of risk. And that is adopted company-wise, and that's informed by economic conditions that affect Transnet business from time to time, and is generally reviewed every 2 years. So at the point when the board approved the estimated cost at 38.6 billion, the hurdle rate was at 18.56%, and the NPV that was worked out, that is taking into account the total cost of ownership, the revenue that would be earned, and what would be profit at the end for Transnet, was worked at about 2.7 billion rand. So it was a very thin profit margin. And so it was sensitive to whether the strategy that they were advancing by embarking on this procurement process, which was informed by a new strategy to drive demand as opposed to simply reacting to existing demand. That 2.7 billion would be very sensitive to that. If it falls slightly, then you might go into negative NPV. Or if other elements that inform the business case and the NPV fail, that could result in the NPV being negative. Now, when the approval of the initial business case was in 2013, but the procurement happened a year later, so there was a delay. And we'll hear whether the economic conditions relevant to Transnet changed for the worse or for the better, and whether the change in the cost of acquisition, holding everything else the same, would have impacted on the NPV. But what happened was when the memo was presented to the board for the approval of the increased estimated costs, the memo acknowledged that if the hurdle rate of 18.56% was used as in the initial approval, the business case would have a negative NPV of about 1.67 billion rand. The witnesses will give the precise figure. But the claim was that the hurdle rate had in the meantime been changed. And you will see from the evidence that whatever change happened, the board approved the change in May 2014 after the contracts had already been signed in March 2014. But so the presentation to the board was based on a new NPV which was less than the 18.56, so 15.2%. Sorry, hurdle rate, not NPV. And at the hurdle rate of 15.2%, the business case not only became profitable, remained profitable, but even better at about 11.5 billion rand. So from 2.7 billion, which was then, to 11.5 billion rand. And so one would accept that the board would then think, well, there's money to play with, and the approval was made. And the allegation there is that the CFO misled the board by failing to disclose that the increase in the cost, or the estimated cost, would have an impact, a negative impact, or adverse impact on the NPV. And the second part is that he deliberately changed the hurdle rate from the applicable 18.56% to a lower rate of 15.2%. That's in order to conceal from the board that in light of the increase in cost of 54.5 billion, the business case of the project was no longer profitable to Transnet. So it's either one or two. It's not. We don't have to prove both of them, but it's important here because the EXCO drives, as we understand, and he would be a main driver of the review of the hurdle rate from when it falls from it. And so either that we can show the deliberate change relevant to the project, or that the application of the changed hurdle rate to this project was not justified or not appropriate in the circumstances, and it's something that he should have disclosed to the board in 30.1.1 for the board to take a decision to approve in light of all of the relevant facts that the project might probably in the long run not prove to be profitable.
Can I just ask, wouldn't the same question apply here if you deliberately make changes that it's not negligence but dishonesty?
Yes, it would. Yes, that's correct. So that would apply. So that's then you will see that there is so that's the first part in 30.1, and then there is a 30.2 which should be in the alternative. Because it's a lesser form of the conduct, I think, maybe construed as containing a lesser form in parts of the conduct in 30.1, but we can debate that at the end once we've had the evidence. And this is that he misled or allowed the board to be misled by failing to disclose that the increase would have the adverse impact in relation to the project. And 30.2.2 is a repeat. It's just referring to a different part of the...
My understanding of the manner in which the charge sheet has been formulated is that the Institute seeks to fall within both bylaw 34.2 and 34.10.
That is correct.
None of them are in the alternatives.
Yes.
What you contend is that the facts or the evidence justifies
Either
both.
or both.
Both.
Both, yes. The only difference is in 30.2.1, there is a little addition that he either misled or allowed the board to be misled. So he may not have actively been the misleading part, but given his position, he should have spoken and for the board to see the risks that may inherent in the project going forward. And then 7 relates to the cost saving, that there was a saving, and that is that the saving that the board was misled or allowed to do, or either he misled or allowed the board to be misled, that there was a cost saving of between 6 billion and 10 billion rand realized with the conclusion of the transaction, when this was not the case. and that is both in the two paragraphs. And again, it's the old bylaws as alternative. So those are the first part that deal with the business the business case. And then the second, charge 8, which is at A14, we start by giving a summary of the facts, and then at A15 the charge is formulated. And this was this related to an issue which was addressed in the RFP and which was permissible by the RFP, was that so there were fixed numbers of locomotives that were to be procured, but there was a realization that it's possible that there may be a point in time in post the conclusion of the contract that Transnet might want to stop at a point and not procure the full locomotives. But that if that happens, the OEMs would have already incurred setup costs for their manufacturing facilities to deliver, and that they would need to be compensated for those costs. And so they were asked to give what they call breakpoint pricing at various numbers of volumes and what the prices would be, and they quoted for that. What was not envisaged was that as part of contract negotiations and prior to the conclusion of the contract, the batches could be split between more than two OEMs. So for example, you needed so much for diesel, so much for electric, and that there may be a decision to say we have two top performing OEMs or top scored OEMs for diesel, and we shall split the diesel locomotives procurement between two as opposed to one, and the same with electric, and that might add a premium to the price. That was not provided for, and Transnet board did not approve that should be the case. But what ultimately happened is that in the negotiations, that is precisely what happened. The negotiators under the chairmanship of Mr. Singh agreed with the OEMs to split the batches, and that added a premium to the price that the Transnet was to pay to the locomotives. And the complaint is that was negligence because that was not allowed, and it was contrary to the mandate of the negotiating team under his chairmanship. So that's the charge. Yes. So we'll leave the evidence, and it will be clear from the evidence whether that was done negligently or deliberately as a negotiating strategy on the part of Mr. Singh and his team. Then there are certain post-tender negotiations, and you'll see that we give at A16 we start off giving summary of the facts giving rise to charge 9, and then the charge itself is at A17, and that is that Mr. Singh was part of concluding the contract in a manner that was inconsistent with the PPM, that's the governing policy in relation to procurement, because any material amendments to the contract that was concluded needed the prior approval of the board, and there is a monetary limit of 1.5 billion rand, that if it exceeds 1.5 billion, if any external contracts are of value more than 1.5 billion, the board must approve any changes to what the amounts that have already been approved, and that this was not done. At the time when the contract was concluded, no board mandate was obtained to increase the estimated cost to 54.9 billion rand, to incur additional costs as a result of batch splitting and many other costs that were introduced. And then, so that's the complaint under charge 9. And under charge 10, at A19, we start off with first giving rise to the charge, and this relates to the conclusion of the agreements. And and this is concluding the actual agreements without prior authorization, because those were signed, you'll see they were signed on the 17th of March 2014, and authorization was only sought for the board in about May 2014, and that was after the hurdle rate had been changed. And then there's charge 11 relates to relocation of the OEMs. So the OEMs were, it was envisaged that the OEMs will set up their manufacturing facilities in Gauteng. But it was subsequently thought that 2 of them should relocate to Durban. And the question is, at the point at which they were asked to relocate, have they set up any manufacturing plants here? And the evidence will be that they hadn't yet set up any manufacturing plants, but there was a cost allowed for relocation, as if they in fact had set up and relocated to Durban. And we put up evidence to show that that was not the case. And from A23, as I initially set out, those are charges related to the Eskom, his time at Eskom, and we will deal with them when we deal with the Eskom charges. Then, Chair, in relation to the Transnet charges, we hope to present the evidence of three, at most 4 witnesses. We currently have confirmed 3 witnesses to testify before you. The first witness will be Mr. Calland, C-A-W-A-L-R-D, and he's provided a witness statement, so you've got the witness statement. You will have seen from his witness statement that he was employed by Transnet in April 2010, from much early, from 1970. I think most people in the room have not been born yet. He was employed from Transnet at that point and retired in April 2010, but was subsequently contracted by Transnet for a further period of from 5 years, from 2010 to April 2015. And you will see from his evidence that he was also asked by Transnet post that contract period to do certain work for Transnet in relation to these transactions. And that will be part of the evidence he will give. So Mr. Calland will give both factual evidence of things that he had first-hand knowledge of when he was in Transnet, but he'll also give evidence of an expert nature, looking back in Transnet based on information that has been provided to him post his departure from Transnet, and expressing certain views. And we sought in the witness statement to qualify him as an expert to express such opinions, and it will become evident from his evidence that he is capable of expressing those opinions. Mr. Calland has testified before the Zondo Commission of Inquiry, amongst others in relation to the 1064 locomotive, but his evidence to you is slightly more detailed, more specific because of the specific complaint, but narrower in scope to the evidence that he gave to the Zondo Commission of Inquiry, because the points of inquiry are broader. And he'll be our first witness because he gives proper context to the procurement process and to the conduct of which we complain. Then there is Mr. Shabi. Mr. Shabi is an actuary, and he has been retained, or rather, well, retained, yes, by Transnet through their attorneys, M&S attorneys, to conduct certain investigations, some of which informed the evidence presented to the Zondo Commission. So he started but didn't complete his evidence before the Commission. We understand because his evidence is highly technical and requires proper advance notice and proper engagement with the content before he can meaningfully give evidence. So the kind of exercises done for purposes of this inquiry are very similar to the exercises he conducted for the Commission of Inquiry, albeit that this is more specific, as I mentioned, in relation to Mr. Calland. And he will confirm in his evidence that apart from just reading the business case and the financial model, that there was allowance for forex hedging and price escalations in the 38.6 billion, that he actually did some test verification test, if I can put it that, in the market to verify that conclusion. And then he will also deal with the reasonability, as he puts it in his statement, of the claimed savings and costs that have been claimed here, and also whether in fact the project remained profitable after the increase in the estimated costs. And he will also express opinions on whether the reasons provided to the board in the memorandum to obtain the approval of the board for the increased estimated costs, that those reasons are justifiable and fully account for the increase, or whether they don't. And there may be other things that he's able to express opinions on, but that's more or less what he will speak on. If we're able to finish Mr. Kala today, he will be available, Mr. Shadi will be able to testify from tomorrow. And Mr. Sudumedi is an attorney who did investigations for Transnet, in assisting them in preparation for their evidence before the Zondo Commission of Inquiry, and also testified before the Zondo Commission of Inquiry. His evidence will be based largely on the reports that he prepared for Transnet, which were then used for the Zondo Commission of Inquiry, and he's in a position to discuss also the policy basis for the complaints, the policies of Transnet and the like, and to comment about, and to give evidence about what the evidence unearthed about other matters which Mr. Khaled and Mr. Shadi would have spoken about. And if necessary, depending on how the evidence of these witnesses pan out, and subject to availability and cooperation, we may have additional witness from Transnet who is still currently at Transnet and will talk to certain of the issues, in part related to the negotiations, the contract negotiations, and certain of the matters that arise in the hearing. So those are the witnesses we're going to call for this part of the hearing. Then, in relation to the documents you have, you will have a bundle which are spoken about, A1 which contains the charge sheet and the correspondence, and then you will have a bundle of documents which start from page 1 to P905, has been supplemented this morning, and we will refer to those supplemented documents in the course of evidence with some of the witnesses. Those contain the evidential material on which we will rely. You will have seen that the witness bundle of Mr. Khaled includes annexures. Some of those annexures are duplicates of what is already in the trial bundle. We have prepared an index which we will hand up in the course of the day, which gives cross-references to those documents that are duplicated as between Mr. Khaled's witness statement and the trial bundle. For the most part, Mr. Khaled will speak from the documents attached to his witness statement. And those annexes, some of those annexes were used in the evidence before the Zondo Commission of Inquiry, and others were not used there. And I've mentioned the additional documents. And so we hope that at the conclusion of the hearing, ultimately, we will persuade the committee that this is the transgressions, the alleged transgressions have been proved, and they are of such a serious nature that they warrant the ultimate sanction under the bylaws. And those would range between exclusion and perhaps suspension from applying again for membership, or a form of fine. But we believe that we can meaningfully make proper submissions on appropriate sanction once you've had everything and we've argued why we think the transgressions are made out and how serious they are. So that's how we propose to present. Let me just check that I haven't started. Yes, so once when the committee is ready, I don't know whether a 5-minute adjournment might be necessary just to get Mr. Khaled settled and so on.
Yes, so we take a 5-minute adjournment. You can settle Mr. Khaled and then we can proceed.
As the committee, please. Thank you. It's the usual times before breaks.
If the evidence is riveting, we may continue indefinitely. If it's not, we may take shorter breaks.
Yes, and Mr. Khaled can also indicate if he feels...
All right, so shall we play it by ear then?
Let's, yeah,
for
maybe
today.
around 11 past we might feel, and then maybe an afternoon tea break if
All right.
necessary.
Let's
Yeah.
do that.
I mean, those who are catering say lunch would be ready around 1, so
Right,
we
okay.
can take it over.
Well then, I think it will continue perhaps until about 11:15.
Yes.
Take a 15-minute tea break or a restroom break, and then we'll resume again until 1 o'clock.
Thank you, Chair.
Mr. Khaled.
Good morning.
Morning. Thank you very much for attending. Do you have any objection to taking the oath?
No, not at all.
Would you please raise your right hand and say out to me, I swear to tell the truth,
I swear to tell the truth,
the whole truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the truth,
and nothing but the truth.
so help me God.
So help me God.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Mr. Khaled, is it correct that you prepared a witness statement together with annexes for purposes of this hearing?
Yes, I did.
And could I ask you to turn to a bundle that should be placed in front of you, starting from page 1. There is a document there headed Witness Statement Francis Quinty Khaled. Is that your witness statement?
That is my witness statement.
Yes. And that runs together with annexes to about page 306. Is that correct?
About numbered to about 306 of the bundle. Yes, that is correct.
Yes. And are there any corrections that you wish to make to the statement before I ask you to confirm it?
Yes, there are three small corrections that I would like to make, please.
Yes. Could you just take the chair to the page numbers and the paragraphs and then identify the changes?
And in this regard, I refer you please to page 21, paragraph 76. At the end of that paragraph, it currently reads 10 January 2013. That should be amended, please, to read 10 January 2014.
Thank you.
The second amendment is on page 29, paragraph 93.4. The third line of that paragraph it reads, traceable determinants from A, the lowest negotiated BAFO. Please delete the A in that sentence. Thank you. The third amendment is in one of my annexures. It is, I now have to find it in this bundle, I'm afraid.
That's fine.
It is the PowerPoint presentation. It is in the PowerPoint presentation, and it is page 292 of the bundle.
It's 292. Yes.
At that page reads CNR price movements.
Yes, we've got that.
Please change that CNR to read Bombardier, because one will see at the table below that the table is headed Bombardier. It's an incorrect typing on that page. No other corrections today.
Subject to those corrections, do you confirm that the statements is to the best of your knowledge true and correct?
Indeed. Yes, I do.
Then can I ask you to turn to page 2 of that? Then there are additional documents, Chair, that must go into the witnesses bundle at page 307. We're omitted by Karen. Thanks. It's just to add those documents to
Into Mr. Callan's bundle.
Yes, bundle.
We have those.
Yes.
Seems one of my committee members may not have the documents, Mr. Marangi.
The same documents.
Yes. Just checking. One's run to 331.
One starts at 306.
Does it help? Morning. 307 onwards. I just got it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
All the committee members have.
I think so, yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Mr. Kennard, what is your current occupation?
Retired.
Retired. And at page 2 of your witness statement, you give certain background material.
Yes.
Is there anything that you just in summary form, just explain, tell the committee what you set out in this part of the statement?
Certainly. If I could just start at paragraph 3, I think it is well known that I have already testified at the Zondo Commission. This statement contains large elements of my testimony to the Zondo Commission, with some of those annexures as well. However, there is additional material in this statement which relates to my work with M&S attorneys with whom I was contracted after my retirement as a railway specialist, and to provide help in assisting them in their investigations into various railway-related matters. I also, subsequent to my retirement, I did some work for a logistics company, but the last most active period was in my as and when contracting with the M&S attorneys.
And when was that you contracted?
That was from 2018 through to the present. Apart from a career in the Transnet continuous, which is in the statement and in my CV, I don't think I have to repeat that in detail, but it provided me with some extensive railway experience.
The committee has your CV, which is attached to your statement, and you refer in paragraph 4 to your qualifications, which I believe are more fully set out in your CV, is that right?
That is correct, yes.
Then you refer to your 45 years of service at Transnet, and you say you manage various portfolios. Can you give the committee a sense of what those portfolios involved?
Certainly, I started off in the department which was then called Signallings and Telecommunications. It was initially the Telecommunications Department that merged to form Railway Signalling and Telecommunications, which was the department. In that, I managed various major new works projects. After a spell in Mpangeni, where I was responsible for maintenance for Signalling Telecommunications, became a resident engineer, S&T as the title was then, in Durban, responsible for major new works, particularly on the coal line and on the Natal main line. Did the signalling of Central Rand, as it was then, From that, returned to Johannesburg, headed up the R&D section of Signaling and Telecommunications for a while, moved into the IT department, one of the early movers into the IT department when that was first established. For a while was in charge of the commercial software, eventually in charge of a variety of software, oversaw the implementation of a number of systems, including the HR SAP system. Was seconded to the security section, which I ran for a period of time. Was seconded to marketing, where I was responsible for overseas, so not for overseas, but for over-border exports of grain. Then moved to the strategy, and since about 2000 there was continuous time in the strategy department, and through various phases of consultants, which included Mercer and the like, and various elements of business transformation through freight rail, then till my last period when I was contracting was fundamentally responsible for writing major business cases in the capital program department.
And what is the capital programs department responsible for?
That is responsible for implementing capital projects for Transnet Freight Rail, preparing the business specifications, seeing them through to approval, and then other elements within that party are then oversee the implementation of the capital projects. I understand that the organization has changed, that we now have there is another capital program which is more associated with head office, and I'm unsure of that exact one at the moment, but when I was there that was the main phase.
And with the 1064
capital programs and maintenance.
With the 1064 locomotive procurement project, the fall under that capital projects department?
Yes, it did, and it fell squarely under that capital department.
And were you involved in the? We'll get back to it. We'll get to it in more detail, but just for orientating us, were you involved in the project itself?
Yes, my first involvement in the project was around 2008 with the development of a locomotive fleet plan. This was before we got to the 1064, but it was a long-term view of what were the locomotive requirements for Transnet Freight Rail. This followed on the last locomotive that had been bought for General Freight, which is in my statement, was then in 1992. The locomotive fleet was then aging. A plan to procure new locomotives had not materialized, and we needed to restart the engine, restart the bus, if I may say, to procure additional locomotives. The first part was then the development of the fleet plan, what locomotives would be required, over what period, and where they would be deployed. And that plan later evolved into with the genesis of the 1064.
So we'll come back to the...
Can I ask you, sorry, where did you sit in the hierarchy at Transnet whilst you were dealing with the capital projects?
I was a senior manager reporting to an executive manager who reported to the general manager capital programs.
Sorry, senior manager reporting to?
To an executive manager. Who reported to the general manager capital program.
And who was the general manager?
The general manager was Ms. Rita Roper. Rita Roper, R-O-P-E-R.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
And to whom did the general manager report?
She reported to the Transnet Freight Rail Chief Executive, Mr. Siyabonga Gaham.
And perhaps you could just give a since for the committee you do come back to discussing background to Transnet Freight Rail, just the way Freight Rail fits in the structure of Transnet, the business structure of Transnet.
Transnet has a number of operating divisions, the major ones being Freight Rail, Transnet TPA, Transnet Ports Authority, TNPA, Pipelines, Transnet Engineering, or as it was then known, it's now running under a different name, network, I forget the new name at the moment, it was then known as Transnet Engineering. I will continue to refer to it as that one. And I think there were one or two others, small subsidiaries for that. May I stress that while this deals with locomotives for Transnet, these are purely for mainline freight, long freight locomotives, and are not associated with the Passenger Rails Agency of South Africa at all. Though we do have an agreement for the sharing of the network in certain areas, the two bodies are totally independent in respect of rolling stock locomotives and operating systems.
And is Transnet Freight Rail then responsible for that?
Transnet Freight Rail is responsible for freight. It is the freight arm of Transnet, the rail freight arm of Transnet.
Because we'll hear about Transnet Engineering later in your testimony, what does Transnet Engineering do?
Transnet Engineering is a body responsible for the maintenance of locomotives and wagons. They also build new wagons for Transnet Freight Rail. They have a well-established wagon building facility, and they have exported wagons internationally and into Africa. They have various locomotive repair facilities. These facilities are categorized to the type of locomotives being repaired, whether they are diesel or electric, and also to the location of the various classes of locomotives, because different classes of locomotives have different requirements in the repair facilities. They also were, on some occasions, the subcontractor to original equipment manufacturers for the final assembly and testing of locomotives, of which the best known example is the General Electric diesel locomotives, of which where General Electric had a well-established production line within the Transnet Engineering facilities.
Can I ask you to turn to page 3 of the statement? At paragraph 7, you outline the nature of the evidence before the comments today. Can you just summarize what you say in that paragraph 7?
Certainly. That I testified to the Zondo Commission. Sorry. The information in this statement is broadly in two broad categories. Information within my personal experience during my time at Transnet, and the information which I gained during Transnet. And that was the prime thrust of the information which my testimony to the Zondo Commission. Through my work at M&S, I had access to and was developed through the investigations, had access to other information which I did not present to Zondo Commission as it was not within my personal domain of my time working there. However, it is relevant to this testimony, and I make mention of that here, that I was privileged to have access to that.
And then at 8, you talk about the sources from which you derived information, including your reference to your laptop that you use. You just want to highlight what you want to tell the community about that? It
was more to answer the unanswered question of, well, so how do you remember all of this, or where did you get all this information from? I kept fairly good records, perhaps just of the traces of the emails to me, and I had, fortunately, I think very good records of emails dating back to 2012 and before, and some of them going back to 2008.
And then you refer in paragraph 9 to your work with M&S and how you assisted them?
Yes. When I was first approached by M&S and to assist with their investigations, I asked, do you have or have you considered these sources of information? And it was obvious that they were unaware of some of these sources of information and where to find the information. That was, I suppose, where my experience in Transnet came to the fore. And I knew that the 1064 process, all the laptops were backed up onto a hard drive. This detail can be found in one of the annexures in the main bundle. It's in the CFET report. It is detailed there. Unfortunately, many of those laptops can no longer be found, but I was aware that the hard drive still existed and directed M&S to get a copy of the hard drive. It contains about 60 megabytes of data, some of it duplicated, but it has some very pertinent information which is extracted further in this report, particularly in terms of Excel spreadsheets and videos of the negotiation proceedings relating to the 1064.
And do you know if M&S had got access to the hard drive and whether it was backed up and by who?
It was my understanding when I directed them to them that supply chain services from TFR brought the hard drive to M&S and M&S copied it. It was as simple as that to get the information.
And then the next topic you deal with is a background to Transnet freight rail. That might touch on what you've already spoken about, but can you just deal with that, perhaps in summary form, what you say, paragraph 11 to paragraph 19 of your witness statement? You can even take it item by item.
So may I take that straight into the presentation and run quickly through
yes,
that?
Absolutely.
Would you like to? I have prepared a number of slides which are in the annexures, but just to give an indication of how freight rail operates.
Yes.
Would that be interesting? Otherwise, I'll pass on it.
Yeah, that would be absolutely.
Oh dear.
I don't know, is there a technical hitch? Would you like to assist us there, Mr. Campbell?
Sorry, it was connected and then I switched it off because I thought the screen was disturbing, so I need a reconnect assistance, please.
Just we'll wait for somebody. We don't have the competence to step out of that. I'm told that I must speak for myself for that. So then accountancy matter. Yeah.
This brings the IT rules.
The rules for what indeed. So we're getting somebody to come.
Sorry, I didn't realize it would link off at the
Now we
moment.
understand you're an engineer, locomotives.
I have some fair IT experience as well.
Is it? Yeah. Okay. I stand corrected.
No. This slide is the opening one, which really just says that it's the operating division of the Transnet and Eskom, it's a national freight rail carrier. It is a world-class heavy haul freight rail company. It is a Class 1 railroad, and which is in the USA defined as railroads which over a certain length, certain number of employees, certain income, and certain tonnages. Extensive network across the rail network, but in 2013-14, the key points, it transported 208 million tons, 54.3 million tons through the export iron ore to Saldanha, 68.2 million tons of coal to Richards Bay, and 88 million tons of general freight. I've given those statistics, then it transported 14% of South Africa's annual freight tonnage, but because of the heavy haul operations, it made up 35% of the ton kilometers of South Africa at the time. I've covered the 22,000 route kilometers, 30,000 track kilometers. Where one has a double line track, for example, between Johannesburg and Durban, that would be 600 route kilometers, but 1,200 track kilometers. And the track kilometers are important from the maintenance consideration. Just over 2,000 locomotives and over 6,000 wagons, 1,200 trains per day, 4.5 million tons a week. From a commercial classification, there are over some 700 different commodities, but for a practical consideration, they can be grouped into some 98 commodity groups and 4,000 origin-destination combinations for the country. 208 million tons in the 13-14 year, and we've covered that it is the largest railway in Africa and the Middle East. To understand the elements of a railway, we have network infrastructure, locomotives, wagons, crew and operation, yards, all coming together through a national command and control center, and peripheral to this, but to make it happen, container terminals, we need customer sidings and facilities, there are common user facilities, and finally some ports to bring it all together. What categorizes a freight rail is that it has corridors, and these have different densities, and the thickness of the lines there indicate the respective densities of the corridor. The export line from Richards Bay, from the Mpumalanga coalfields, Ermelo, down to Richards Bay, as I said, carrying some 70 million tons, is has the greatest line density in the network. This is followed by the ore export line from Sishen to Saldanha, and it is the second longest heavy haul line in the world at 861 kilometers. The rest is classified as the general freight network, of which the main routes are between Durban and Gauteng, going up into the Pretoria complex, and equally from Sishen through into Gauteng, where ores from the mines around Sishen, manganese and iron ore, are brought into the Gauteng and Witwatersrand complex. We have the Cape Line, not far less utilized, the line to PE, which exports minerals, and then a variety of small branch lines, which are quite underutilized, as we can see, sometimes less than 2 million gross tons per annum. What characterizes this railway, and certainly what characterizes this locomotive, is a concept of axle loading, which determines the network segmentation. Axle loading refers to the weight of the rail upon the axle. So 2 wheels on an axle, and we'd say this could take 22 tons per axle, for example. Or let me use 20 tons per axle. This means the weight of a wagon with 4 axles cannot exceed 80 tons. 80 divided by the 4 gives us the 20 tons per axle, and that is an infrastructure limit which is enforced for safe maintenance operations of the railway. That is the general freight network in orange. What makes this different is that the coal line, as a heavy haul line, has a higher axle loading of 26 tons, and the iron ore line has an axle loading of 30 tons. Specific to this is a locomotive from the iron ore line cannot traverse this network because it would be too heavy for the network. Similarly, a locomotive from the coal line at a 26 ton per locomotive cannot come into the general freight network. And a general freight network needs special locomotives or very light locomotives for the branch lines, which have a very low axle loading. This brings in some of the complexities around managing and operating and scheduling a railroad. If we take that slightly further, this is then further compounded by the traction types, where we have diesel and electric locomotives. Obviously, diesel locomotives can traverse any part of the network. Electric locomotives, we have 3 kV locomotives and 25 kV locomotives and 50 kV. The ore line locomotives are 50 kV and they are very dedicated and ring fenced. This blue or light purple indicates the 25 kV network, indicates the 3 kV network, my apologies, which was the first electrification in South Africa. And locomotives, those early locomotives, cannot move onto the 25 kV network at all, wrong traction type. The 1064 locomotives, the 599 electric locomotives of those 1064 were all specified as dual voltage locomotives. And this was a new, a recent innovation, and that was to enable the flexibility of the locomotives across the entire network, rather than having to have them confined specifically within the electric traction area. The major operating segmentation, I think, matches very closely that of the line density. We have the ore export line, the export coal line, my apologies, on the side. We have the export coal line on the left-hand side. The rest is general freight. And then we have the branch lines, and there was a department for specifically managing the branch lines, trying to bring them to profitability and engage in joint ventures. Specifically to a locomotive, which will come through, locomotives have an average life of 30 years, design life of 30 years. We, through life extension programs, we took that life to 45 years. But by that time, it had reached the limit of its maintenance period, and there was a dire need to replace locomotives in the freight rail locomotive fleet. That was one of the drivers as well for the new locomotive fleet plan, as well as for the 1064 program. Buried in the detail, but the 1064 program was predicated on round figures, 50% replacing the current fleet and 50% expansion of the fleet to cater for new volumes. But 50% was to replace the current fleet, which was at its end. If one takes the 2,100 locomotives that was mentioned on an earlier slide, a design life of 30 years for a locomotive, that would mean that on average we should be replacing approximately 70 locomotives per year in freight rail. As we had not replaced any general freight locomotives since 1992, you can appreciate the pent-up demand for locomotive replacement. A bit about locomotive procurement. An electric locomotive is not something you buy off the shelf. It is a very bespoke design, particularly because of our Cape gauge, which is not the standard gauge as you will find in Europe. Our gauge is 1067 millimeters. It's known as Cape gauge. Between saying we will buy a locomotive to get it in service, the lead time is 3 to 4 years. It runs through a rigorous design, review, sign off. The first prototype is manufactured. The prototype undergoes extensive performance and testing to see that it complies to specification, identify the faults and snags. Only after that is the go-ahead then given to manufacture another 2 or 3 locomotives. Those then undergo similar tests, but perhaps slightly shorter, and only then does the manufacturing process start in full earnest to deliver the locomotives against that specification. But every locomotive undergoes acceptance tests in freight rail. And that's it.
Thank you. The committee will find that slide presentation page 25. It's annexed to his witness statement. Then, the next topic over the page at page 6 is to deal with the locomotive acquisition history. You mentioned that there hadn't been a replacement program for a long time since 1992, and I think you deal with the acquisition process which was embarked upon. Can you just explain to the committee the driving force for the acquisition of the 1064 as against the backdrop of the acquisition history that you set out here?
Sure. And if I may take it broadly through the sequence of my statement, I have already mentioned that around 2008-9, I was asked to develop a locomotive fleet plan, and I developed the initial concepts. In 2010, this was taken over by a colleague of mine who developed a 5-year plan for locomotives matched to then market requirements. This was presented to the board in 2011, and it recommended the procurement then of 776 locomotives over a 5-year period to meet a market demand as it would grow, foreseen to grow then to 155 million tons. I will generally ignore the decimal points unless they are particularly relevant. The board approved this fleet modernization plan at a then cost of around 23 billion rand, subject to a holistic funding plan and affordability. And it was around this time that there was a change in the strategic thinking, because freight rail had been accused of, by the market and by customers, of being slow to respond to changes in demand, and we would only procure rolling stock, develop new facilities, once one had a signed contract from the customer saying, we are committing to conveying these volumes with you over the next 3 years, then we would engage in the development process. That strategy was then changed to say, to facilitate growth in South Africa, we should change it, instead of responding to demand, to creating capacity so that we could capture demand far more quickly and also facilitate a move of traffic away from road onto rail. And this was the origin of the market demand strategy. Of course, this impacted on the locomotive fleet plan, and when Mr. Gama presented the locomotive fleet plan requirements to DPE, he had changed it from a 5-year period to a 7-year period, and over the 7-year period, this then was the genesis of the 164 locomotives. I'm reading there at the bottom of page 25 of paragraph 25,
Yes.
where the tonnages were to increase from then around 80 million tons to 176 million tons over that 7-year period. This was virtually a doubling of tons over a 7-year period, and it was an incredibly ambitious plan.
And this was not existing demand already, it was what you believed you could create
It was,
by generating capacity.
may I be careful about how I answer the we. It was what the marketing department believed we could create.
Okay.
And what was, it was what Freight Rail said, this is our 7-year market demand strategy. In my statement to the Zondo Commission, I deal with questions on that, but it's not part of the statement.
We accept that it's not directly pertinent to this thing. Then you deal with the market demand strategy itself. The next topic, can you deal with that?
Yes, and I think I have mentioned that.
You mentioned the near doubling of the demand.
My statement was 91.2 million tons in 2013-14 to 180.5 in 1920, which from, please read paragraph 25, was 2018-19, and 180.25 in 1920. That's a later year, just showing the increase in tons there.
When you, sorry?
No, that's fine.
And you referred to some extracts from the business case. And that extract FC2 is at page 45. Could you just, let's go to page 45 and see if there's anything that you want to highlight there that you haven't already discussed in that paragraph 27.
What I would like to highlight from this is, and at the bottom of page 46, where we see the total MDS strategy, you'll see the figures I referred to, and that on the bottom line of page 46, it has total MDS under 2010, and it has 180.2 million tons. This is then made up of from the various business units within Transnet Freight Rail, and on the left-hand side of these columns, you will see on page 45, we will see we have agriculture and bulk liquid, coal, export iron ore, intermodal, mineral mining and chrome, and steel and cement. And each one of these business units is then further broken down into generally a specific traffic flow with the incremental increase foreseen each year, plus some specific assumptions, some specific comments which support that assumption. The one column, the second last column from the right-hand side is headed tons increase, and that will show the significant increase in elements of that traffic over that 7-year period.
And what denomination are these numbers?
Those are in million tons.
And then if we go back to your statements, then you now get more specifically to the 1064 locomotives. And you say you're going to outline the development of the business case, show that hedging escalation were included in the business case, or allowed for, and then show that the accelerated locomotive delivery was, in my opinion, ill considered. Could you attend to that and explain how you came to this conclusion?
Certainly.
Can you start that over the page at page 8?
And I'll start, yes, at page 8, paragraph 30. The first locomotive business plan was developed from the work on the market demand strategy, which had been outlined. It was predicated on that strategy and the near doubling. I developed this first business case and presented it to the Transnet Freight Rail Investment Committee on the 9th of March. May I just mention that Transnet, with its delegations of authorities, has a number of investment committees. Freight Rail has its investment committee, which has certain limits of authority in terms of capital expenditure, maintenance expenditure. A business case, if it is outside those authorities, is then referred to the next level, which was then CAPIC, which was the Capital Investment Committee. Beyond the Capital Investment Committee, it went to, generally it then went to the Board Acquisitions and Development Council, and if it was beyond their authority, it would have to go to the board itself. Beyond their authority, it would have to go to the shareholder. And each one of those levels of authority were clearly delineated.
Mr. Kenneth, in paragraph 30 of your statement, are we to read the last sentence? The business case was presented as meaning you presented to Transnet?
Yes. I presented that. With an estimated cost of 38.146 million. My estimate at the time.
38.146 million was the per loco.
Yes. No, that was the total ETC. 38. Sorry.
Billion.
Correction. I should read 38,146
million.
Yeah.
So 38 billion.
So 38.146 billion. For good understanding. Correct. My apologies for that one.
And just to clarify, is this estimated cost just for the locomotives, excluding the wagons?
This was purely for locomotives, just for the locomotives. I give that figure because we will later read that in conjunction with the current figure under debate of the 38.6 billion. So This was a year earlier.
And you referred to the CAPIC and you've explained to us where CAPIC sit by reference to the Trade Investment Committee. And then you talk about the presentation of an updated version to CAPIC of the business case.
Shortly thereafter, Mr. Garman presented the updated version to CAPIC, and CAPIC looked at this and they suggested that an external party review the 1064 business case. This was now in March 2012, and they also envisaged that the contracts would be signed in January 2013.
So you say that a CAPIC meeting, the CAPIC decision that an external party should review the 1064 business case was in March 2012?
March 2012, yes.
The statement, is the date then corrected in the second sentence of paragraph 31? Refers to May
I just refer to Annexure FC?
Let's go to FC. It's at page 47.
FC3, please.
It's at page 47.
Page 47. Reading page 47, at the CAPIC meeting held on the 21st of May 2012, and that the CAPIC meeting was on the 21st of May 2012, and the notes there indicated that it was decided that Transnet will run a parallel process. Transnet need to augment the business case from a group perspective, producing all the needs. And we would engage with DPE. And I'm reading halfway through there, and that small writing is attended. The process for negotiating the successful tenders will be conducted in November, December 2012, award signing the contracts in January 2013, and payments in 2013. That was from those notes. I must admit I have to go back.
Just read the last line in that
timetable
document.
Attached as Annexure 3 also outlined.
Sorry, I meant in the annexure itself.
Sorry, in the annexure.
Page 47. It says the last Roman 2 says the acting chairman stated that Transnet has conducted the risk assessment and is engaging
a multidisciplinary task team of transaction advisors to assist it with the business case.
Yes. Does this help you recall whether the external advisors were engaged in March 2012 or March 2012 or May 2012?
There were, to the best of my knowledge, there were no external advisors, transaction advisors engaged at that time. That only happened that was 2012, that only happened in 2013.
I think the question relates to the dates that you provide in your statement in paragraph 31. May I try and see if I can't assist? Were there two CAPIC meetings, one on the 19th of March and the other on the 21st of May? Or was there one meeting and the date of the 19th of March an incorrect reference?
My understanding, as I recall it at the moment, is that there were two meetings, and in shortening this,
All right. Does that help you?
That helps. Yes. Thank you, Chair.
Were you present at the CAPIC meetings?
No, not at these ones. No, I was not present at either of those ones.
And the reference to the acting chairman is a reference to whom? In page 47.
Page 47. Back to there. I can't remember who was the acting chairman at that particular meeting. It could have been a number of people who might have chaired the meeting. I know some of them who might have, but I cannot say who was the acting chair at that meeting.
Mr. Taylor, on paragraph 30, we talk about the 1064 business case was now developed. It's my understanding that based on your experience of the tonnage, that was a realistic demand for the South African economy per year, that 1064 would have been an excessive amount to purchase.
Was it the correct number of locomotives?
Yes. You were against the number because you thought it was excessive, but you were still in any way then part of the team that developed the further case of the 1064. Do I understand it correctly? You were part of the team that then had to go and present this business case, even though you were outspoken against the realistic nature of these numbers.
No, I was not outspoken. May I
Yes, please.
elucidate that? I did not initially come up with a number of 1064.
Yes.
That came up through my colleague, Rowan Ayers, who I mentioned, came up with that pre-planned, and Mr. Garmer presented it to DPE. I took those numbers and the MDS, put them together with the locomotive run-out strategy, the aged locomotives, the 50% that would be run out, 50% that would go for expansion volumes, and supported the number of 1064. It was a number that was predicated on a reasonable increase in the locomotive efficiencies at the time. Considering that the better our locomotive efficiencies, which would be locomotive utilization, the fewer locomotives one would require. In other documentation, one of the expert witnesses or experts that was employed by McKinsey said we only needed 900 locomotives as opposed to the 1064. That would be correct if we could have achieved the appropriate efficiencies and changes in our operating processes to realize that. However, whether we could do that in the time frame is a moot point. So the 1064 business case was predicated on still a reasonably aggressive assumptions, say reasonably but attainable assumptions in the improvement of locomotive efficiencies for these tonnages as we had in the market demand strategy. The second part, and I refer back to my evidence at Zondo, yes, I thought the market demand strategy was highly optimistic because everything which we had done illustrated a hockey stick effect across so many of the commodities that one had to question the underlying assumptions. But that was another story.
Can you just explain what you mean by the hockey stick effect?
The hockey stick is if one plots the traffic conveyed over a period of 10 years from certain customers and overall, traffic over, say, a 10-year period. Then you add on that graph the 7-year increase in volumes that are posited. You have a graph which will look, it will look something like this and then go up like that. So it looks like a hockey stick. You have been relatively flat with perhaps a 2 or 3 million ton increase in loco volumes per year. Suddenly you are now increasing by 10 million tons per year. The graph says, begs the fundamental question, well, what are we changing so fundamentally that makes this a realistic assumption? And that's what I mark in terms of the hockey stick effect.
Thank you. Then you turn to the involvement of McKinsey
Yes.
Paragraph 33. Is that linked to what you said earlier about the need to obtain an external party to review the 1064 business case?
I link it to that. I won't say is a direct link, but yes, McKinsey was brought in to validate or develop the business case. I don't think that, yeah, it was brought in to develop the business case.
And you carry on, can you just carry on with
Sure.
With McKinsey's involvement in what you say from 33 onwards?
And so a freight rail locomotive team was formed under Mr. M.D. Laconia. Myself and many others were part of that. In this process, McKinsey changed the original business case by extending the locomotive delivery by 2 years beyond the original 7 years. And the effect of that, and if I may go back to page 35 and then refer you to an item in the main bundle.
35, you mean that slide, FC1? The slide you put up on the...
No.
No.
If I could take you please to page 351 of B10.
Sorry, it's 3,000 of your witness statement?
No, of the main bundle.
Of the main bundle.
Of the main bundle.
Yes.
If I could direct you to, on page 351 of the main bundle, to the middle of the page, and this was a mail from Anoj Singh to my colleague J.D. Pillay, and I was copied in that mail. And I'll just read, "Hi J.D., per my telephonic conversation with SAICA today, we've agreed to revise the business plan to reflect the 1064 locomotive requirements by 2019 instead of the current 2020 timeline. In order to turn the business case around for the SteerCo and board," now this was on a Friday, I believe the 12th of April was the Friday, "I will need you to help the working team by providing by close of business Sunday a number of analysis revisions that I understand sit with you. My team will require to follow." And it goes on. That was the trigger for my point 35, that on Friday the team was asked to turn the business case around for the locomotive steering committee. That was the trigger mail for that. That Friday was very interesting. We were working late and under pressure at McKinsey's office, and I contend, as I submitted, that they were just not understanding what we had to achieve. They were not rail or locomotive specialists in that form. And I comment that I found their disposition then to be both unprofessional and frustrating. It was reflected.
When you say the requirement was to revise the business plan to reflect a 1064 locomotive requirement by 2019 instead of 2020, does that mean bringing the delivery forward? What does that mean?
It was originally a 2019 plan. McKinsey, when they were developing things of their own accord, extended it by 2 years. This was asking them to bring it back. We were not involved in how they had extended it or why they had extended it, and we had to come in to bring it back.
Sorry, Mr. Keller, extending what exactly?
The delivery period of the locomotives. Sorry.
Let's just explain what the delivery period of the locomotives was in terms of the business plan that I think was presented to Transnet Rail Investment Committee and to Capital. It was envisaged there as far as the delivery period was concerned.
May I move, not necessarily related to freight rail and CAPEC, but talk to it more generally.
Yeah, that's absolutely fine.
Given that the market demand strategy posited an increase in freight to be conveyed, for that increase in freight were needed the additional locomotives to convey that freight, which had to be matched to the market demand. So when I said we needed 50 additional locomotives to convey those additional tons on top of the, in addition to the current fleet and replacement, one would need those 50 locomotives, or sorry, 50%, apologies, not 50 locomotives, but 50% of the 1064, delivered over a period of 7 years, which matched the market demand cycle. It would make no sense to have the locomotives delivered over a 2-year period or a 3-year period when the demand had not materialized and the supporting infrastructure and wagons were not available for the locomotives to be used. They would effectively be parked and not used. So this is when we talk of matching the locomotives to the demand. Now, McKinsey had extended the delivery period by 2 years. We were asked to bring it back to match the 7-year MDS plan. And that was the exercise which we conducted over that weekend.
By extending the delivery period by a further 2 years, it didn't mean bringing it forward, it meant extending it to a 9-year period, correct, as it were.
Correct.
In order to presumably take into account the market demand.
We don't know why it was extended over that period of years. You'll see from there are other mails, but there we said, why did you do this? We had no answer to that, but we had to bring it back.
This matching of the 7-year market projected increase in market demand and the delivery period, you said it would not make sense to shorten because of you wouldn't have infrastructure and so on. You mentioned a couple of considerations. Are there others that would count against shortening the period in those circumstances? What about personnel?
Yes, there are. I'd like to...
I know you come back to it later in relation to the shortening of the delivery period, but perhaps because you raised this and the committee is following your evidence, now, you might just tell us what other factors would be relevant to whether you keep it to 7 years or you bring it forward, say, 4 years.
Well, the other factors relating to the locomotives are they matched to the market? Do we have the tons to convey? Do we have the number of wagons which can convey that additional tonnage? Are those wagons in place? I'd just like to go back to the unanswered or unasked question. Why the delay between the initial business case in March of 2012 and now of 2013? And that was because when we took it beyond CAPIC and to the Department of Public Enterprises, we were asked, so you've got these locomotives, but these are just one element. Please come to us with a total integrated holistic plan which matches locomotives, wagons, and the infrastructure so that we can see you've addressed this in a systematic and complete whole, and you are not just dealing with a single element. We need a complete picture. That took some time, and that went through June, July, August, September of 2012. Once we got overcome that hurdle, we were then into the 2013, and then the pressure was on get this locomotive plan in place. McKinsey was then brought on board.
So we are at the top of page 9, where you were talking about how you found McKinsey's disposition, etc. And then can we move on to 36, where you're dealing with your next engagement with Mr. Anoj and Mr. Pillay and Mr. Baldwin.
Yeah. So after we spent this reviewing of the business case and creating various inputs, and bear in mind that through this we had what McKinsey wanted to say, what we felt was the correct version. On the afternoon of the 17th April, Pillay, Boa, and myself sat with the Anoj and Mackenzie, and literally we did a page-by-page turn of the various elements, and we agreed what should be in, what should be out, what should be accepted, what should not be accepted. Which resulted on the morning of the 18th of April, or sorry, by the end of that afternoon, we had a version that was, we felt, pretty good. Morning of 18th of April, it was widely circulated as an input to the 1064 Locomotive Steering Committee that was to start at 10 o'clock that morning. The purpose, as per page 5, and please here refer to Annexure FC4,
Which is page 48.
page 48, and if we could turn to page 49, please, page over, which is page 5 of that version of the business case.
And you're welcome to read the royal part of this.
I just read the last paragraph of page 49, the last sentence. Accordingly, it is recommended that the 1064 business case be approved. Interesting in this one, it is, in this purpose, it is silent on the total cost.
So you talk about total cost. There's going to be total cost of ownership. Just can contrast that with the cost that you're referring to here. This is just the cost of the locomotives.
That's the cost of the locomotives. That's the cost of the locomotives.
And in that paragraph 37 in your witness statement, you refer to the steering committee. When was this committee set up with you, the 1064 locomotive steering committee?
I can't recall the exact day, but it was, or date. That information is available, it is accessible, but it would have been around the time that the locomotive task team was formed, and I don't mention the date under my paragraph 33, I just said a task team was formed. It would have been around February or early March 2013. The Locomotive Steering Committee, I think, would have been set up around that same time, but that is subject to verification.
And is this a standing committee of the board? Oh, sorry. Is this a committee of the board first? The locomotive steering committee, or is it a management committee?
It comprised Messrs. Malefi, Garma, and Singh. I don't know whether Mr. Malefi created it or whether the board created it. I can't say at the moment. I can't say offhand.
And what were their positions at the time? You know, Mr. Singh's position, what were the other two, Mr. Garma and Mr. Malefi's positions at Transnet at the time?
Well, Mr. Malefi at that time was Group Chief Executive. Mr. Singh was Group Chief Financial Officer. And Mr. Garma was the Chief Executive Transnet Freight Rail. So it was a high-powered locomotive steering committee.
And was this a standing committee or a committee specific for the project?
It was specifically set up for the process.
And you know what its mandate was, even if it's more general, what you can recall?
Traceable information. I did not read up on it, on its mandate for this one, but generally it would have been to oversee and manage the process of the procurement of the 1064 locomotives, generally. But I'm as general as that without having read the mandate for a long time.
You say in paragraph 37, Mr. Keller, in the last sentence, that the purpose on page 5 was silent on the project estimated total cost.
Yes.
What is the point that you seek to make there?
As we go through these subsequent versions of the business case in hedging and escalation, you will find I will constantly refer to page 5 of the business case, where under that purpose you will see hedging and escalation being referred to at that point. So the point I'm making off here, it starts off on the 18th April version as being silent. We will later see, as I go through the statement later, the subsequent versions, how this changes.
Yes. Okay, then you say at 38th, you refer to a meeting of the 18th of April where the business case was discussed. Is that the same meeting you refer to at page 37, paragraph 37?
That's the same meeting. Yeah. Now, that's the broader outline. I will now deal with it in detail and in the next paragraphs under hedging and escalation.
Yes. Okay. Move on to that.
And I think it is common cause that hedging and escalation is one of the contentious issues of the 1064 business case, and whether, by extension, it was in the financial model to include hedging and escalation.
Can I just ask you to explain to us whether there is a distinction between the concept of a business case and the financial model, and what the differences are? How do they two relate?
The business case is generally is the word document, which is presented to say, this is why we believe it's a good idea to make this investment, spend this money. The financial model is the financial workings, generally in the form of the Excel spreadsheets, which would support, contain the figures and assumptions and support the financial calculations which are presented into the business case, generally in the form of tables or annexures.
So you say that one of the contentious issues whether the business case as you describe it and the financial model both make provision for hedging, forex hedging and price escalations.
Indeed.
And then what is your evidence which you now deal with from 40 onwards about that contentious issue?
Right. So I would then go directly to my paragraph 41, where in April McKinsey finalized their own financial model, and one of the core inputs of this was a series of emails from around 10th of April to the 12th of April. Recipients of this were McKinsey and the core team, but later included Mr. Garma and Mr. Singh. And in this case, please see Annexure F5.
That would be page 50.
Page 50.
Sorry, Mr. Can I take you back to something
Sure.
that you said earlier, now that you're referring to hedging and escalation. Do I understand you to say that the document that you and Mr. Kenyane presented on the morning of the 18th, in other words, the so-called business plan that had been dealt with over the weekend and up until the afternoon of the 17th, that made no provision for hedging and escalation because it's not reflected in purpose?
The point I'm making there is that the purpose of that page is silent on hedging and escalation.
Right.
The hedging and escalation was included in the detail of the business plan and could be traceable through the detail of the business plan and the financial models. It was not explicitly stated in the purpose.
So it's
of
not
page.
that the business plan made no provision for it at that stage. It did, but was not reflected under the heading purpose.
That is correct.
Would there be a logical reason for exclusion or a sinister reason? The fact that it's silent, what should we read into that?
I can't answer you on that one because we did not write up the purpose. I will show you later that the business plan in that form moved under the control of McKinsey, and I will demonstrate that. So we did not write up that purpose. So I can't comment on that. But I think you will see later why that question becomes very relevant.
So you have asked to go to page 50, is that right?
To page 50, yes.
And that's in
Would
relation
this be an appropriate time, or
Yes, yes, it would be. Because
before we move on to another document?
Yes, we will.
Shall we resume at 11:30?
May I just ask before we break, Would it be appropriate to put this email up on the screen because it's incredibly small writing here? I don't know if I do have it on the laptop. I could project
Yes,
it.
my watch is running
Yours is running early.
early. So it's 11:23 now.
Yes.
So we then take a 15-minute adjourn and come back around about 11:35.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
I'll have this email on the screen.
Yes, we'll get IT to help.
We are still connected.
Yes. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. JD Francis, see the current price estimates. We project the overall cost to be 39 billion. Our US dollars costs per locomotive, 26 million, 2.6 million US for the diesel, 3.5 billion US for the electric. We arrived with David Potter. We have escalated these prices based on projected US inflation and converted back to South African Rand based on the forward rate from Treasury. It doesn't know if you have any feedback. I replied back, I get a slightly lower price for the diesels, but it was a relatively small difference, so I don't want to dwell on that. Then this was the discussion with Mr. Garner on the same email, same chain of emails, and you'll see that this is still addressed to Mr. Garner. Mr. Singh is not in this one yet. This was the delay in 2 years, the shifting out of 2 years. We need to bring that back. We couldn't accept the proposed delivery. This was, in fact, the point of this email, however, was to show that in the internal emails from McKinsey, Forex and hedging were included. If I could then move to...
So that if you go back to page 10 then of your witness statement, paragraph 41,
Yeah.
so you say you summarize the pertinent points that arise from what you just did going through the emails. Is that right?
Yes. Yes, those are the pertinent points from that email. Yeah.
Do you want to just go through them, or are you happy that you summarized?
I summarize them for the record, that the price and Forex estimates, 41.1, were sourced from expert interviews. The base locomotive prices were US dollars 2.6 million for diesel and 3.5 million for electric. You'll see that will be consistent throughout the process. Contract signing fee was assumed at 250 million for diesel and 300 million for the electric locomotives. Let me pick that up here. Contract signing fee, 90% payment on delivery, 250 million and 300 million for diesels and electrics respectively. Hedging costs assumed to be 8% of the cash flow. And the last one, Mr. Nasim Sadaji from McKinsey instructed Michelle Bajnath to put these assumptions into the financial model. I was party to that.
In the last sentence to 41.5, it's quite important about your involvement.
I was party to vetting the financial model, and this was done. That is, those assumptions went into the model, and the ETC included hedging and escalation from that financial model in that Excel spreadsheet.
You refer in paragraph 41, Mr. Cannon, to the fact that the recipients were initially McKinsey and the core team, but later Mr. Gama and Mr. Singh.
Yes.
Are you referring to the email at FC5, which you've just taken us through?
FC5, and I'm still on FC5, and there was copied to Mr. Gama and Mr. Singh.
Where does one see that?
You'll see
yes,
that.
thank you. So that's the email dated?
That email, that one was sent, top. That was sent on the 11th of April 2013.
Thank you.
Is that the top email on page 15?
That is the top email of page 15. Yes.
Yes.
Thank you.
Then if 42 you refer to the PowerPoint presentation by McKinsey. Do you want to take us through that? That's paragraph 42 at page 10.
Yes.
Are you also putting that up on the screen?
I just want to refer you next to Annexure 6
that's the absence.
which
That's page 52.
page 52, which I appear not to have referenced in here,
Now you have reference to the page at paragraph 43.
paragraph 43.
Yes.
Paragraph 43. Let's go to the slide presentation next. Then on the 18th of April, I'm reading from paragraph 42, Pedrazi from McKinsey distributed a PowerPoint presentation on the procurement of the locomotives. This PowerPoint presentation comprised a number of slides, but two slides of particular importance. If we turn to page 11 of my statement, and that paragraph 42.1, slide 12 of his presentation, of which we have an extract below. If you will see in that diagram picture, Forex, that is the 1, 2, 3, 4th bullet, current Ford ZAR US exchange rates average at 11 Rand to the dollar over the acquisition period. And then next under price, US dollar 2.6 million, Rand 25.2 million for diesel, US dollar 3.5 million, 33.9 million for electric, assuming 50% localization, 2% localization period, premium, RSA component escalated with inflation, US dollar component escalated with inflation, and converted back to South African Rand at Ford exchange rate. That is slide 12 in the body of the presentation.
To whom was this presentation circulated, Mr. Cameron?
That was a presentation which was sent from McKinsey to Mr. Singh.
And can I just ask you, where you read us in relation to price, would those the escalations there refer to price escalation or just foreign exchange or both?
But price escalation, as I read there, RSA component escalated with inflation.
Yes.
Read that CPI. And the US dollar component escalated at US inflation, which we assumed to be 2%, and converted back to South African Rand based on foreign exchange rates. If that is in the body of the slide, the concluding slide, the last slide, slide 27 in that final presentation, full presentation can be made available, however, had been changed from the previous version of the slide with the addition of excluding the potential effects of forex hedging, forex escalation, and other price escalations. That slide is reproduced at the bottom of page 11, and if you read there, it reads, BADC recommends the following to the BOD for approval. The acquisition, ETC for the acquisition is estimated at 38.6 as per the corporate plan, excluding potential effects from forex hedging, forex escalation, and other escalations. The two slides are entirely in contradiction with each other.
Just when you were asked by the chairperson, you said this slide was sent from McKinsey to Mr. Singh.
Yes.
How was it sent, you know?
Email.
By email.
Yes.
And have you seen the email?
I have seen the email. I have the email.
You have the email.
Yes.
Is it not included in this, attached to your witness statement?
I think it is in my statement to the Zondo Commission. It is not in this one. But I can make it available if certain.
That would be very useful.
Right. So I just asked you to make it.
Does the email tell us what the purpose was for circulating the slides by McKinsey to Mr. Singh?
I would have to bring up the email again to I cannot recall as I'm here the exact words in the email. I'd rather bring up the email to be exact about that.
In paragraph 42.2, sorry, Mr.
Oh, yes.
No,
Vice,
sure.
you say that the slide 27 had been changed from the previous version.
Yes.
What previous version are you referring to?
there was another previous version of this PowerPoint presentation where the concluding slide had it was either silent on the exclusion, but it was a 38.6, and it did not have. Sorry, it had been changed with the addition of excluding the potential effects from forex hedging. So it read, EGC for acquisition is estimated at 38.6 billion as per the corporate plan. Full stop.
Let's call it. Is it possible that the addition could have been made on request to highlight the exclusion?
Could I just hold that question for a moment, please, to take you through a sequence of the best of other inconsistencies which I think may direct to answer that. I would contend that this was a deliberate change. This was not an accidental change, and that is my conclusion at the end. But I would like to take you through the full process to get to that conclusion.
A deliberate change by the author of the slide.
A deliberate change by the author of the slide, and I would submit that was on instruction. I will show you later how that comes about.
Do you want to move over to page 12 and to continue with the paragraph 43?
Yes, thank you.
Unless you still want to say something about the page 11 with the slides.
No, that's fine. 1 point, anomaly inconsistency. I'd like to move forward now to page 12. And here, if we could please turn to page 52 of the bundle, Annexure 6.
Yes.
Also on the 18th of April, this was a busy time, Pedrazi emailed Mr. Singh the business case with a specific version number 2012-0418, 1064, final PDF.
You're reading from the top of
I'm
the
reading
top
from
email.
top. I was reading from my statement, but this refers to the email, top email, page 52, and you will see there it is page 52, the second part of the email you'll see from Fabio Pedrazi to Anoj Singh. Page 52, about a third of the way down the page.
Does that email precede the top email?
It precedes the top email.
Yes.
The top email is just circulating to a wider audience. Do we have that as reference?
Yes, we do. Yeah.
Thank you. It is from Fabio Pedrazi to Anoj Singh, copy to a number of internal McKinsey personnel. But I would like to take you through the pertinent points in the email, which are also my statement number 43. Anoj, final version for BADIC. The updated numbers are now 2.7 billion NPV versus 0.03 billion including new forex curve based on Treasury's input, adjusted fleet estimates to add up to 1064, updated CO2 savings, updated, and point 4, updated total cost of ownership as a result of the forex change. Point 5, new funding and forex hedging section derived from Dani this morning. That would be in Dani Smith in Transnet Treasury. Updated sensitivities, although this should be minimal. All exhibits have been updated. We are printing 15 copies of this new version for the steer code tomorrow. Please work off this version for our 9 a.m. pre-meeting at Carlton.
The steer code is the locomotive steering.
Locomotive Steering Committee, yes. This email, I can tell clearly says that McKinsey to Anoj says Forex and hedging are in the business case. May I then take you to paragraph 44. At that meeting that they were referred to, that locomotive steering committee meeting, Mr. Singh was the acting chair. This was held on the morning of 18 April. The draft minutes were circulated on the 25th and are as Annexure FC 7. That is page 54.
Yes.
I could take you through the draft minutes, but suffice to say I've extracted the critical points under the sub-paragraphs there.
You were present.
Sorry, Mr.
I was present at that meeting.
Mr. Kamat, can I just go back to the
Sir.
email at page 52? You say the email clearly indicates that Forex or hedging were included in the business plan
Yes,
and the business case.
yes.
The business case was forwarded presumably to all of the parties on the top of that page you included, or was it just the email thread?
No, the Fabio sent the Zadig Loco business case.
So this morning,
To Anoj.
this is the latest version for discussion this morning.
Yes.
You would have received that.
And I received that. I received that from the top email on page 52,
Yes.
where it comes from Tembi. Remember, she was part of that locomotive team. She distributed it to a far wider audience, and I was part of that.
So all of those people would have received this this updated business plan,
Yes.
which would have included,
This
as you
email.
say, not the email, but the attached plan.
Yes,
That's what I'm
they would have received the attached plan, version 18.
right. And
Yes.
going into that plan, one would then have been able to see whether or not it included or made provision for hedging or forex escalation.
Correct. But they would also have received this self-same email, which highlights the changes made in the plan, which I think are quite clear that forex and hedging were elements of the business plan.
I would have thought that the answer to that lies in looking at the business plan itself rather than the email,
Well, yes,
and looking at the business plan to see whether it's there or not.
I will come to that in a moment. Yes, this went to this wider audience.
I think the chairperson's question is, I know you're going to come to it and go to the business plan, but he's asking you whether, when it comes to you, even on the cover of the email below showing you what it must include, for you to verify that those elements were included, you would go to the actual business plan that is attached.
At that time, no, I did not go into the business plan specifically because I had no reason to suspect that it was not in there. Having worked with McKinsey, having worked with the financial models and the rest, one trusted that it was in the business plan. Bear in mind that at this point in time, we had now, after our page turning exercise on the Monday morning with Anoj, after our page turning exercise, the control of the business plan passed into the hands of McKinsey. So we had no direct input into what was further put in or taken out. So from this email, trusted. Thank you. As the business plan updated, reading the heading, I did not have to read the business plan to verify anything at that time.
Thank you. You can carry on. Were you taking us to the meeting of the 18th of April, and you just confirmed that you attended the meeting?
I attended the meeting, yes.
So you referred us to page 54 and 55, which is the 54 is an email and 55 is the draft minutes you said. You can carry on, and in your witness statements you are paragraph 54.
The 54, 55 and the minutes 56 are fairly long. I'd like to highlight you to the relevant sections, which are then extracted below as paragraphs 41, 42 and 43 from the minutes of that meeting. The minutes of the meeting, the GCE, and this was Mr. Singh talking, that the GCE has confirmed that he's worked through the document sent to him on 17th of April and he's satisfied with the document. The differences between the documents submitted on 17th and 18th April 2003 include inter alia. One, significant amendment. Forex rates included in the model previously were high. Forex rates have now been amended downwards. This is in italics. It is a direct extract from the minutes of the meeting. The Forex rates have been amended downwards, which creates an NPV on the business case at a hurdle rate of 2.7 billion. Accordingly, the 0.3 billion NPV at hurdle rate in the previous versions of the document has been amended to 2.7 billion. Consequently, the business case is more robust.
That will be at page 56 where you extracted the
That-
case.
I extracted that from page 56, and that is bullet point 1 at the slightly above the center of page 56. Those were the minutes.
Just remind me, Mr. Keller, what is GCE?
Group Chief Executive.
Group Chief Executive.
That is Mr. Malefi.
Mr. Molefe.
Yes. If I could refer you to page, my statement 45, paragraph 45, and also page 57 of the minutes. Notwithstanding what has just gone before in what has been included. Page 57, and I would read that paragraph 3.1.2 on page 57. The steering committee resolved that it recommends that the Group Executive Committee approves the acquisition of the 1064 locomotives for the general freight business. Second bullet point. Estimated total costs for the acquisition of 38.6 billion as per the corporate plan, excluding the potential effects from forex hedging, forex escalation, other price escalations, and borrowing costs. As I said, stated in my paragraph 47, I cannot explain this contradiction.
And I suppose the question is, you were at that meeting, you were for that resolution to be taken in those terms.
We were at the meeting, the minutes came out later. I didn't really worry about them. We were passing on. I assumed the minutes, I didn't have to worry about the minutes. So, no, I did not pick that up. This came to the fore when I was asked specifically why was hedging and escalation not included in the minutes.
In the minutes or?
Sorry, in the business case. My investigation then was to show conclusively that they were included, and that is when all these anomalies came to the fore.
Then,
May I go further then to,
yes. You go to 48, I suppose.
yes, to my 48, which is annexure 9,
That's page 59.
page 59. This email is from Nishal Bidnath at McKinsey, and it's to JD, my colleague, and myself. Batic feed dates and update. Hi JD Francis, congratulations, Batic approved. Hopefully the board will go as well. And I use this email to suggest that McKinsey were party to the presentation at the Batic meeting, on the basis that if they were not at the Batic meeting, how could they McKinsey send this email to us saying, congratulations, it went well, and we hope the others go as well. Neither JD nor myself were at that BALIC meeting, but for McKinsey to send this email, I submit this. Well, a reasonable conclusion from that is that they were at that meeting to present the business case. And the normal process in those meetings is that one uses a PowerPoint presentation. Hence the PowerPoint presentation that Fabio had developed, which I alluded to earlier, is so vital to this discussion. On the 29th of April, Budai, and that was a colleague in Transnet, Naresh Budai, circulated another version of the business case, and that was 2013 0429. So that was the version of the 29th of April for review and comment. That is in Annexure 10. And he asked for particular feedback. The business case was updated as per the input from BALIC on 23 April, and Annexure 11, that is page 62 and page 63, refer. 62 is the cover page, 63 is page 5, which again deals with the purpose. Bear in mind, most people just go to the bottom line and they read the purpose without going through the detail of the business case, if they're happy with the presentation. And it now reads, accordingly, it is recommended that the 1064 locomotive business case be approved at a cost of 38.6, excluding borrowing costs. That is how it should have read. It included the hedging and escalation, a factor that is part of the business case, incorporated in the business case. It aligns to the practice that when one submits a business case to the board, the ETC presented is the total cost of the project, including all the peripherals. The only thing which we could not effectively ascertain was what is the cost of borrowing capital for the project. So that is something the Treasury Department would have to ascertain to say this is what it's going to cost for us to borrow the capital for the project. But that says it includes everything. So that should be correct. Perfectly happy with that. On the 30th of April.
Cannot, one moment, please.
Mr. Collett, just going back to page 52.
Sure.
And the attached business case. We keep referring to changes that has been made from the original business case. But at any point in time that we inspect the business case that was shared, the original business case, I think version 18, on the 18th of April 2013, and ascertain that in that business case it did actually state, particularly that it included the effects of borrowing of FX and
escalation.
And the hedging.
No. At that time, had no reason to suspect that there was anything untoward in this process. So we had been working with McKinsey, albeit that sometimes it was a difficult relationship. Once we had gone through that weekend and the page turn, and it was under their control, my colleagues and I took it at face value that this was going to be okay. Those elements would be correctly reflected in the business case. There was no reason to do a side-by-side comparison. Again, I only did that much later when this issue of hedging and escalation came to the fore.
So is it possible that the business case shared, that version, could have included the specific wording referred to stating that it excluded the effects of forex hedging and forex escalation, and that is the version that was presented for approval.
Just give me that again, please.
Perhaps let me see if I can't assist. Do we have a copy of the version that you referred to in your witness statement at paragraph 44? Sorry,
43.
43.
Yes, we do have a copy. I have a full copy of that.
And what does that version say under the heading purpose that you've identified?
Purpose, but does it refer to?
So, two parts. Firstly, what does it say under the heading purpose? And secondly, does it in fact, if it's not under purpose, refer to the costs associated with forex hedging and escalation? Yeah.
From memory right now, I can't say. But what was part of my Zondo testimony, and that one I need to just refer to that for a moment, was that part of the frustration with McKinsey was that when they put the purpose of the business case, they highlighted the first purpose of the business case was in effect to create 28,000 jobs in South Africa and described a socio-economic environment which was the rationale for the business case. There was nothing about, in the purpose of the business case, the fundamental rationale that you need locomotives to move traffic, and the current locomotives are aged.
I'm not so sure that answers our question.
Yes, the question, the two parts to the question, when you go to 43, it's whether you have access to the business case as at that point,
Yes, I do.
that version, and whether we can go into that version, see whether under purpose it includes the words excluding forex hedging and price escalations, and whether in the body of that business case there is provision, either there's provision for forex hedging and price escalations, or there isn't. So they just want to know what the state of play was as at 18 of April 2013, so that they can follow your later evidence that was changed.
And more importantly, whether that was the document that informed the committee, the steering committee at its meeting of the 18th of April 2013 to take the resolution that it did.
Yes.
If you would bear with me for a moment, I will bring that business case up on the screen.
We can defer that, if that's acceptable to you, Mr. Knight, just to carry on.
Sure.
You like.
We can highlight one point which becomes relevant as you carry on, is that whilst he's been highlighting the purpose section, he's also going to go into the content of the final business plan, which will show you, according to his evidence, the contradiction.
Yes. So we can flag this if it's inconvenient to deal with it for the moment.
I will
Once
be able
you
to bring
find
it
the
up
document and pick it up, you can
after the
give
next
it back
break.
to us. Yes.
Yes.
Certainly.
So we were at, it's just...
Page 63.
Page 63, yes. So we had said that the page 63 reflects how the purpose should have been reflected in the business plan.
Yes.
Yes. And that is in relation to paragraph 49.
Now,
Yes.
recall on the 29th of April, we had one version of the business case circulated which said 38.6 excluding borrowing costs. On the 30th of April, Mr. Burai emailed a version dated 0430 of that same business case. This is Annexure 12, which you will find on page 64. You will see on page, in the center of that page, date of submission the 25th of April to the Transnet Board of Directors. Final procurement of the procurement of 1064 locomotives. If we turn over to page 65, again to the purpose, at the bottom of the page we will see recommended that the business case be approved with the ETC of 38.6 billion as per the corporate plan, excluding the potential effects from forex hedging, forex escalation and other price escalations. The purpose has been changed. The business case. I come to item 50.2, that this change was effected by Mr. Yusuf Mohammed of the Group Chief Financial Officer of Transnet. I testified to this at the Zondo Commission. Mr. Mohammed responded, acknowledging that he made the change, and however, in the substance of my reply to Mr. Mohammed, it was that he confirmed the change was made. I'm reading from 50.4, that he made the change and that it was on instruction from Mr. Singh to effect this change.
I'm not so sure I follow. Did Mr. Mohammed convey this to you and then you recorded it in your replying affidavit?
I testified this testimony to Zondo.
Yes.
Mr. Mohammed then responded to my testimony with an affidavit that indicated, he acknowledged he made the change. He confirmed that the change was made. He confirmed that he made the change because the metadata indicated it was on his machine. And he said the change was made on instruction from Mr. Singh.
But that was in his affidavit?
That was in his affidavit.
Sorry,
absolutely.
It didn't come across clearly to me. Yeah,
there's a long explanation of his rationale as to why he made the change. But the germane points are, he made the instruction on the change on the instruction from Mr. Singh.
It might be that your 50.4 doesn't correctly convey what you said. It says the substance of my reply to the affidavit filed by Mr. Mohammed was that you confirmed the change was made.
The reason I phrased it this is because this was my reply. Mr. Mohammed's affidavit, while I have answered it at the Zondo Commission, is not yet in the domain as filed as part of the evidence. So I cannot quote from it directly. I still have it. It's not.
Are we entering problematic terrain here, Mr. Anji?
This is
in relation to the commission, but not the evidence as such, because he's aware of what Mr. Yusuf Mohammed's version is. But and that's all he's conveying. But I accept that in relation to the rules, I think we'll check the position after during the break about whether he's breaching those rules when he refers to the contents of that affidavit.
Yes, I think that just be a bit cautious there.
Yes.
There are two parts to it. The one is whether it affects anything that may be relevant to the Zondo Commission. And the second is what the probability of that evidence would be here in the absence of the affidavit itself. So
it certainly depends on Mr. Mohammed. The probability depends on Mr. Mohammed. So it is hearsay, and either we're going to provide you direct evidence that confirms that, or alternatively try to say that you can accept it. But all of that we will consider, especially in relation to the Zondo Commission. Perhaps we can caution the media not to repeat that part of the evidence, because we may be transgressing on the Commission rules.
yes.
if I may, I have taken this reply in 50.4 in summary of my transcript of my evidence to Zondo, which is in the public domain.
Thank you. So to that extent,
Okay.
to the extent that he's repeating his reply to what Mr. Mohammed has said, it might not be.
That seems
But
to
there
be.
is a nuance in that he is telling us what Mr. Mohammed says
Yes.
in his affidavit. So we need to check that.
Phrase, the substance of my reply,
Yes, that's why 50.4 reads the way it does.
Yes.
which is in the public domain.
And I understood your paragraph 50.4 to refer to what you've said in your reply, but I was interested to know where you got it from. It's unhelpful for you to say something in your replying affidavit regarding Mr. Mohammed unless he conveyed that to you directly or is contained in another document in support of that.
Unfortunately, I can't, Mr. Mohammed's document.
But I understand.
We will see how we take you out of the uncomfortable position that we're putting in.
Shall we carry on?
Yes. So that's that. And then you refer to the letter date, which is at page 66. What does that convey to you that you want to convey to this point?
66 of the bundle.
Yes, of your witness bundle.
That
FC13.
FC13, that just indicated that it was Mr. Yusuf Mohammed who made the changes. But we've dealt with that and he acknowledges that the changes were made.
Yes, so the only issue really, which is what raises the question, is on whose instruction that change was made.
That was the critical point to bring out. We have no issue that Mr. Mohammed made it. We've covered that. It was on whose instruction.
Carry on.
Sorry,
Because
if I might clarify one thing, just going back to page 62, 63, and 64, 65, and in terms of the version of the changes, just demonstrated that the document was modified and the affidavit speaks of the modification on the 30th of the month. But if I look at the versions presented as page 63, that's a version submitted on the 29th, so that's the date before the change. And 65 is a version that was submitted on the 25th, which is also prior to this change referred to. If we could just get clarity as to the change and the dates, because the chronological flow of the evidence is a bit confusing for me.
Yes. You understand the question?
I understand perfectly.
Yes, please.
And that date of submission to the Board of Directors between the 29th and the 25th, it's my understanding that if I speak here under correction, that the actual date was of the Board of Directors submission was in fact the 25th of April. That's why we call it this final one. But between the time of the board meeting and the documents being processed and going out, we did have a couple of, there was some days between that, and that was why this one, which came out as 62, was from Naresh Budai, and it was later subsequently corrected, and it was corrected back to the 25th of April, two changes. The 29th was changed back to the 25th. You'll see the date of review of the 29th was removed, the difference between 62 and 64, and also we had a then change as to the purpose.
Just do you recall when the board actually met to consider the submission of the business case?
My best understanding, and I will confirm that, but I believe it was that final date was the 20th of April.
Yes. Can I ask you to turn to the additional documents that were added to the bundle at B906?
Sorry,
B906.
906.
board meeting the 20th of April.
Yes, can you just identify the document for the committee till
Sure.
to what it is?
B906 from the main bundle is a certified extract from the minutes of the Board of Directors of Transnet held on the 25th of April in Durban. The key point here is that Board of Directors meeting was on the 25th of April.
And what had this meeting anything to do with the approval of the business case?
And it refers further under 8.15, procurement of the 1064 locomotives, and it resolved that the
Could you
board...
just read 8. Those paragraphs from
Certainly.
8.15.1.
Certainly. Procurement of the 1064 GFB locomotives. Management took the board through the submission as contained in the pack. The submission was taken as read. The submission was recommended by the Board Acquisitions and Disposals Committee to the board for approval. The chairman indicated the Board Acquisitions and Disposals Committee recommended that Mr. Skoskana be co-opted onto the Board Acquisitions and Disposals Committee to provide financial expertise in the procurement of the 1064 GFB locomotives. Resolved that the board approves the following. The process will be followed for the acquisition of the 1064 GFB locomotives with reference to procurement strategy and process, capital and financial risk, subject to PFMA approval. Delegates authority to the GCE, that is Mr. Molefe, to approve the issues of the RFPs, request for proposal, subject to PFMA approval.
Over the page? Just keep
Okay,
going.
sorry. The co-opting of Mr. Skosana onto the Board Acquisitions and Disposals Committee to assist with financial expertise on procurement activities for the 1064 GFB locomotives. Certified a true excerpt.
And the reference in 8.15.1 to the submission to the board, do you know whether that included the business case? That you have referenced as the final version of the business case at page 64.
I cannot say at the moment. Certainly, the presentation to the board would have been in the form of a PowerPoint presentation. That was the standard practice. Whether the board had access to the complete business case like this, I cannot say at the moment.
May I return to Mr. Van Heerden's question, which I'm not so sure has been answered. Mr. Van Heerden, I think, wanted to know the following. If I can take you back to page 66, perhaps as a starting point, your statement.
Yes.
Page 66 reflects that the business plan had been changed by Mr. Mohammed on the 30th of the month.
Correct.
But we know from the document that you've shown us at page 64, which is a document dated the 25th of April, that now already includes the reference to the words excluding the potential effects. So it must have been amended prior to the 30th of October. So who
Yes,
did this
yes.
amendment?
I cannot say. I cannot say.
And equally then, on whose instruction was that amendment then made? You wouldn't know.
My simplistic explanation of that is because this went through the office of Naresh Burai, who was responsible for really the control of documentation, to Baddick and the board. He would have made the change from the 29th and brought that into the made that the 25th. Bear in mind, he sent it out on the 20th. He sent this one out for the 29th, corrected this back to the 25th. But then there was this one significant change which he had not made, which was to add excluding the potential effects.
But
I
we
do
don't
not-
know who made it then.
I cannot say who made that change between the 29th and the 25th.
Well, the other way around, between the 25th and the 29th.
No, can't. 29th, 30th. I don't know who made that one.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Campbell.
However, because this document, which is now Annexure FC 14, is the final approved business case, starting at page 68, which has this word on page 71 of this document. Again, it reads, Forex hedging, Forex excluding the potential effects from Forex hedging, Forex escalation, and other price escalation. This is the document which went out into the general domain. This was the locomotive business case.
So this I see is a longer document, this is the full business case.
This is the full business case. I included this one, because we use this one as for reference going on. This is the one approved by the board of directors. And I read-
Is it a proven fact within Transnet, when you've done the investigation in Transnet, that this is the final business case which the board approved for purposes of going on tender for the 1064 locomotives?
Everything which I have in the sequence of emails, events, and traceability is that this is the final business case. And I said so in my statement to the Zondo Commission that this is one approved by the Board of Directors, referred to as the final business case.
For those who responded to your evidence from Transnet, has anyone put in dispute that this is the final business case on which the procurement was conducted?
No, no one has put that into dispute. And why I would add credence to the fact that this is the final business case. When the first investigation was conducted into the 1064 by Bergman's attorneys, the first question I was asked against this business case, this one here, dated the 25th of April, was why did we not include hedging and escalation? And I was directed then to the page 5 of the business case, which you would see as page 71 under purpose. I said, I do not understand. I only really became aware of this in January of last year.
But it seems to me, Mr. Kellard, that that phrase is consistent with the resolution that was taken by Steerco and consistent with slide 27.
Correct, correct.
So as a chronological thread, starting off with what is contained in slide 27, moving up to Steerco where that resolution was then taken, and then ultimately the business plan, or the final business plan, all contain the same phrase.
Correct, correct. However, may I add to that?
Yes, please.
What you have outlined is the documents that would normally be read at first glance by the decision-making authorities. Thank you, give me the executive summary, I will read the purpose, I will read the cost. Very few of the board members would go through, if any, go through the detail of the 108 pages in the detail. Similarly, what I've shown already is that the emails from McKinsey and the financial models show that hedging and escalation was allowed. In the PowerPoint presentation, despite what I said in the conclusion, hedging and escalation were shown to be allowed in the detail of the slide. In the minutes of the Locomotive Steering Committee, in the body of the minutes, it is talked to Forex hedging and escalation, yet for unknown, cannot explain the anomaly that the resolution reads differently. Now, in this business case, where we have a purpose here which says excludes hedging and escalation, may I take you to the next part?
Before you go,
Sorry.
can I just ask you to
Yes.
identify also that it's not only in the purpose, but it's also in the recommendation, if you turn to page 77, where the signatures appear. So that's part of the, you identify the executive summary that starts at page 72, and that ends at 77. And can you just read what the recommendation is just about the parts that are to be signed?
The recommendation on page 77, that is page 10 of the business case, Transnet recommends to the Board of Directors of approval the acquisition of the 1064 locomotives for the general freight business. Estimated total costs for the acquisition of 38.6 billion as per the corporate plan, excluding the potential effects from forex hedging, forex escalation, and other price escalations. That's what was presented for signature.
And before we move up to the other parts that you want to refer the comments to, I'd like you to turn to page 75 and 76, which is in the executive summary itself.
Yes.
And that deals with managing sensitivities and risks. And I'd like you to have regard to the last bullet on that 75 and read it. And also over the page at 76, the passage headed foreign exchange exposure management. Just read those and I'll ask you to comment on whether those are consistent with the purpose and the conclusion in the executive summary.
Reading the last bullet on page 75, foreign exchange exposure. Assuming target levels of localization, a change in the rand to US dollar exchange rate of 10% would represent plus minus 1.2 billion rand impact on capital expenditure. Given 15% devaluation of the rand against the US dollar over the past year alone, such volatility is not unrealistic. See the Treasury section below for the mitigation strategy. Second bullet, locomotive purchase price. Closely linked to foreign exchange fluctuations are additional locomotive purchase price risks that need to be actively managed during contracting and negotiations. E.g., change order risks related to detailed specifications. A purchase price increase of 10% would have a negative 1.5 billion rand impact on NPV.
And then the foreign exchange exposure management.
Foreign exchange exposure management. Transnet's group policy on financial risk management requires that all contracts must be either rand-based or effectively hedged to minimize the risk of financial loss due to exchange rate fluctuations. Should a rand-based contract not be possible, hedge accounting will be applied to manage any foreign exchange volatility. The project will be hedged according to the group financial risk management framework.
And can I ask you then to turn to page 108?
Yes.
That's the passage you referred to in your statement at paragraph 52.1. Do you want to read that passage at 5.2 to the end of just before impact of localization, and then you can go back to your witness statement to make the points you wanted to make?
Sure. Page 108 of the bundle, approximately just below halfway down the page.
If you just start from 5.2 at the top of the page and just read down to the exhibit 29.
Okay. Forex risk mitigation will be imperative for a transaction of this size. A change in the rand to US dollar exchange rate of 10% would represent a 1.2 billion impact based on the amount of localization assumed. Given a 15% devaluation of the rand against the US dollar over the past year alone, such volatility is not unrealistic. Forward exchange rate projections suggest a devaluation of the rand versus the US dollar over the next few years. Transnet's hedging approach. Transnet's preferred option is to enter into RAND-based supply agreements with OEMs or the hedges undertaken by the OEMs themselves. However, even when hedging is conducted by the OEM, Transnet ultimately pays for the cost of hedging, which is factored into the purchase price. The main advantage of a RAND-based supplier agreement is the elimination of volatility in the group's financials and the non-utilization of bank credit lines for hedging purposes. Going further. Should Transnet not be in a position to enter into a RAND-based agreement, all foreign exchange exposures will have to be hedged as per the board-approved financial risk management framework. It is anticipated that Transnet should be in a position to obtain the necessary credit lines to hedge the foreign risk exposures, to hedge the FX risk exposures. However, this cannot be guaranteed, as a number of banks will have to be approached to diversify their risk exposures, and the banks will have to obtain approval from their respective credit committees. However, there is a risk that the magnitude of this transaction will add pressure to the availability of hedging lines for future MDS requirements. Then, crucially, long-dated hedges as anticipated in this transaction are expensive due to banks' capital requirements. The exhibit below shows Transnet's treasury view of a Rand US dollar forward curve, including the cost of hedging used in the business case.
And then you have the exhibit 29. What does that show us?
Well, exhibit 29 shows a projection of the Rand dollar exchange rate over a period of 7 years from a spot exchange rate at the time of compiling the business case of 9.13 Rand to the dollar, moving through the years till at year 7, the projection is to be 12.55 Rand to the dollar.
And can I ask you to turn to page 123, still in the business case? Could you read that whole section on conclusion under 9?
Conclusion. Having explored all options, Transnet's purchase of 1064 locomotive is a critical procurement event that will transform the business, increase operational efficiencies, support local supplier development, and enable Transnet to meet its MDS targets. Key risks are being mitigated. Volume volatility will be addressed through flexible procurement. Foreign exchange risks are being mitigated through hedging, and potential shortfalls are being mitigated through efficient procurement and accelerated locomotive orders. The business will be operationally ready to take on new locomotives, and interdependencies are being planned for. Therefore, Transnet recommends the purchase of 1064 locomotives, 465 diesel, 599 electric, at an estimated purchase price of 38.6 billion.
You wanted to make the points. I've just taken you to this passages which you identify in your statement. If you want to make the points about whether this business case included forex hedging or didn't, and price escalations as per the purpose and the recommendation you saw in the executive summary.
Certainly. And what I have just read out, corresponding to my statement of points 52.1 and 52.2, Forex was included, the impact of Forex hedging was included in the business case. This is again an inconsistency with the final statement under purpose where it says hedging and escalation are not included.
When you say included, Mr. Keller, do you mean considered?
No, I mean included.
You mean as part of the financial model,
As part of
supporting the
financial-
business plan?
That's part of the financial model, yes.
And just to clarify, if the estimated cost of buying the locomotives is 38.6 billion, is your evidence that part of that was to allow for the cost of hedging for forex exchange fluctuations and price escalations?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It was included in the model. It is, this detailed reading, the business case would come to the same conclusion, and the further points of number, my point 53 would further confirm that.
I mean, you return to that topic at paragraph 54 of your witness statement. Paragraph 54 of your witness statement.
May I go back to paragraph 53 first?
Yes, slightly.
If I can take you back to paragraph 53, a further reading of the business case, Annexure FC 14, reveals that the escalation was included by the illustrated examples below.
That will be page 101, where you refer to page 34 of the business case, will be page 101.
Page 34 of the business case.
Yes.
May I read there under the paragraph, total cost of ownership of new locomotives?
Yes. I read whatever, all of it.
The TCO, total cost of ownership of locomotives, was calculated using bottom-up analysis and expert input and has the following components. Purchase price. As mentioned above, the purchase price is assumed to be $25 million, US dollars 2.6 million for a diesel locomotive, and 34 million, US 3.5 million for an electric locomotive in 2013-14. The purchase price for diesel and locomotive, for both diesel and electric locomotives, assumes a conservative 50% localization component with 2% localization premium applied. The localization component ramps up over time. The US dollar component, price component, was forecasted by escalating at US dollar inflation, and we have already referred to that table of US dollar inflation, and converting back to South African rand using the South African rand US dollar hedge rates. The local price component was escalated at South African PPI. Refer to Exhibit 21 for the TCO breakdown and Exhibit 22 for the purchase price breakdown.
And Exhibit 22 is at page 103. Is there anything you want? Or do you really want to say by reference to the exhibit itself?
No, those exhibits refer more to the components of a locomotive than to the purchase prices, than to the escalation hedging. The point I read, was to clearly demonstrate the business case that hedging and escalation were included in the component price. May I take that one step further?
Yes.
53.2, which is from page 39 of the business case.
That will be page 106.
Page 106.
Starts at 105, I think.
Yeah. The text underneath the line.
That's on 105, sorry, I beg your pardon.
105. Treasury considerations. Read it, the first sentence. The acquisition of 1064 locomotives will cost 38.6 billion and has been included in the overall MDS funding amount of 86.5 billion over the next 6 years. That's the total capital plan. May I jump fast forward, please, to page 106?
Yes.
The center of page 106. The planned new fleet is estimated to cost 38.6 billion using escalated calendar year 2013 prices. Key point. Escalated 2013 prices. The acquisition of the 1064 locomotives will be funded using a mixture of cash generated by operations and external borrowing. That then gives them funding. The key point is that first sentence, using escalated calendar prices. Hedging is included in the pricing.
Do you read escalated calendar year prices as including hedging,
As including the impact of hedging, yes.
as opposed to just plain escalation?
Escalation relates to CPI, South African CPI. Hedging is relates to the movement of the rand against the dollar.
Yes. Are they the same or are they different?
No, they are very different.
Well, that's why I ask. When they refer to the escalated calendar year prices, is that a reference to the CPI escalation or is that a reference to hedging?
So I read that one as to hedging within. Sorry, let me backtrack from that.
So the question is
Backtrack from
whether
the
that,
escalation.
do you read that
Backtrack.
as allowing for price escalations, simple price escalations, or hedging for currency fluctuations?
I understand Mr. Keller said there's a difference between the two.
There's a difference between-
So this could certainly not be read as including hedging.
No, apologies, I backtrack on that. Escalation relates, we normally use it related to CPI.
Yes.
Forex is to hedging. Apologies, I gave them this backtrack on that. That would be CPI.
Is this a convenient time?
Chair, before we...
Oh, sorry.
I
Yes.
beg the chair's pardon?
Mr. Van Heerden has a question unless you...
Oh, no, yeah, that's absolutely fine. Mr. Van Heerden.
Just another point before we close on this and maybe move on is if we can maybe just look at page 107, paragraph 5.1.1. There's a reference to funding risks.
Yes.
Yes, do you want to have a look at that and see whether it has any relation to the point you're making about the inclusion or exclusion of forex hedging in price escalations?
No. There is also significant comment in the business plan about funding risks and volatility and sensitivities. This is more a sensitivity discussion around elements which may make up the locomotive price or the rand exchange rate. Any negative movement on the base, and I'll read from the statement there, underfunding risks on the second sentence. Any negative movement on the base assumptions exposes TFR to a potential risk. And those base assumptions in the model, financial model, were here's a locomotive price, here's the foreign exchange rate, carries the local CPI, and when one then considers the components of a locomotive and the escalation formula which would be applied for a locomotive, changes in the price of steel and the like, if those were to change in the future, those could have a variation on the price of the locomotive. The main ones which would, the main determinants or risks to the future price of the locomotive would be the foreign exchange rate and the CPI calculation.
Thank
So
you.
I think you were asking, sorry,
Yeah.
you were asking about the convenient time?
Yes,
Or maybe it's me wishing for that question.
in which case, is this a convenient time?
It is, Chair.
Good. Shall we adjourn then until 2 o'clock?
Super.